Good. We talking?
Cool. Cool. Hello and welcome to Wisden's live coverage of the 2025 100 draft. I guess we'll start by saying why we're doing it in the first place. So Ben and I yesterday were looking forward to the coverage of the draft, and then we found out there was no live coverage of the draft this year in video form. There's a live blog on the 100 website, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to do some live coverage on the tournament, especially so in 2025, given all the new investment that's gone into the 100, the added interest. There have already been some massive name direct signings for this year's competition. Ben, I guess first of all, it is interesting that there is no television or broadcast coverage of the draft. It's now 5.5 years ago since there was a massive TV event for the first ever draft of the 100 back in late 2019.
Yeah, and I wonder if this will be the last year where there's not a big song and dance made about it, because with the teams having been sold, it's a transitional year. Like even saying the teams have been sold isn't quite accurate yet. They're in this sort of 8 week exclusive negotiation period where they can sort out exactly what their deals with the host counties look like, blah blah blah. But the point is that they're not like, you know, feet under the table. It's not as if, Mumbai Indians are picking whoever the Invincibles are buying right now. They might have a bit of a say and say, a bit of a nudge here and there. But there's kind of, this is where we transition. And then next year we kind of get into, the all singing, all dancing, newly sort of semi-privatized 100. And I wonder if that'll be when we really get going. We've had some buys, by the way, as and some big ones.
Yeah, no, hang on. I'm gonna explain the rules to everyone first. So you have squads of 15. You've got the women's draft first, then the men's draft. Up until a couple of weeks ago, all the squads could retain up to 10 players. Direct signings count as a retention. And at the end of today, every squad will have 13 players in their group, and 2 slots are left for wild card picks that are based on performances in the Blast. There's a max of 3 overseas signings in total. I'm going to quote something directly from the 100 website. There is one complex thing during the draft. Each team gets a right to match option. This option enables a team to re-sign one of their 2024 players they didn't previously retain when a rival team offers to buy them during the draft. I hope you can follow all that. 29 women and 37 men will be chosen to take the squads up to 13 players each. In the women's draft, we're going to have 4 overseas women and 25 domestic women. So it'll be very interesting to see just who those 4 overseas women's players will be. Ben is right. The draft has started, and one of the most high-profile, I guess, moments in the retention process was that of Oval Invincibles batter Paige Schofield being released. She's going to be at Oval Invincibles again, Ben.
Yeah, she is, and it looked like a bit of a risk with her putting in that her base price pretty high. It's not often that domestic players are putting themselves up there, but fair enough. I wonder if she kind of had the work mode Invincibles that this was going to be the case. And yeah, she was first out the bucket for Birmingham Phoenix. And then she's got Birmingham Phoenix. I wonder if this is a tactic from them, basically picking sides that they know the other teams are going to use their right to match on and just burning through them. They've had 3 goes at signing a player now, and each time the right to match has been used. So Sophia Dunkley to Welsh Fire, Heather Knight to London Spirit, which we knew was going to happen, but still, I guess it's smart draft play to make other teams use that card early. But it's kind of funny how, I wonder if Birmingham Phoenix will ever be able to sign a player, or if they'll still be trying to do this in a couple hours time.
Yeah, and something that is a trend in both competitions at the moment is that the teams who finish towards the top of the table, they are unsurprisingly much more settled than those closer to the bottom. So Paige Schofield has gone to Oval, where she was last year. Sophia Dunkley, Welsh Fire, Heather Knight, London Spirit. Those were the 3 teams that finished in the playoffs in 2024. So in Oval's case, we speak to Lauren Winford-Hill on our Women's Cricket Weekly podcast every week, and she was talking through how there's almost something a little bit mean in being forced to release 5 players each year. And what those 3 teams have done already is essentially keep 11 rather than just 10 of who they had last year, using the right to match. And Paige Schofield, Ben, really interesting player. She's someone that we're a massive fan of on the podcast. She's in her late 20s, didn't play international cricket until 2024, but has really emerged, and especially with England looking to the future now after the Ashes, she is someone who is probably the standout player on the outside of the core of the England team at the moment.
Yeah, and stand out as well as a player who's actually got better through her later career. Like, she was always a good player on the domestic circuit, but you actually haven't had loads of England players who have gone from being, that sort of level to stepping up and looking like actually in a competition like the 100, they can go and mix it with the very best. And it was really last year where she was especially stand out, and that made her look like a real player of quality. And then obviously making a debut in that Ireland series. So in 2024 is what across all T20 cricket she was averaging 32, 33 at striking 140. Those are properly elite numbers. And if she has another year like that, then she becomes not just a sort of fringe England player, but a real England player of note, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the knocks of the tournament last year was early on against the Phoenix. She scored 71. I remember she was batting in tandem with Alice Capsey, and I thought you couldn't tell who the England star was. So well was Schofield batting on that day. Birmingham Phoenix have a player, Georgia Vole, in as an overseas. Amazing standout home summer for Vole. Brilliant in the BBL. International debuts across the formats. International 100 in an ODI against India. She's gone to the WPL, got a 99 not out at the moment. The other day, she's just 21 years old. Ben, looking at the squad list for Birmingham Phoenix, they were always going to target one of Alyssa Healy and Georgia Vole, I think, because they had a £65,000 slot and a £50,000 slot, which are the two most the two most expensive slots. And there aren't actually that many of those available at the moment. And also a big deal for other players as well, because there are only 4 overseas slots available, full stop.
Yeah, and I guess, you don't want to read too much into it because it's just, one team's opinion, but interesting given the context of Australian selection as well, where they had the decision to make, sort of decision to make over Georgia Vole versus Alyssa Healy, where Georgia Vole came in that India series, was standout when Alyssa Healy was injured. Alyssa Healy comes back, but not sort of fully fit, but still sort of pushing Vole outside. Hasn't had a very good Ashes herself. But then you can sometimes see how that established hierarchy in in an international team where that kind of that leadership comes in. Obviously, Healy being the captain, that can be less of a consideration when it comes to a franchise team where they just want who they see as the best player. And for Birmingham Phoenix, that's been Georgia Vole. And based on, you say WPL, based on that home summer, who can blame them? And just sickeningly good for a 21-year-old and that Australian top 3 in that Test match where they're all so young and all so good. They've got themselves a real player there, Birmingham Phoenix.
Yeah, I guess the added dynamic there is that Birmingham Phoenix still have Amy Jones. So if they signed Healy, they'd have one of the best wicket keepers in the world not keeping wicket, which is fine. I know that in previous years, Birmingham Phoenix have attracted some, maybe not criticism, but raised eyebrows at how many wicket keepers they've had on their roster, which I never had an issue with because you're allowed to have more than one keeper, and it doesn't make a difference. And if anything, takes away a wicket keeping option for another side. I guess another interesting thing, Ben, that's been a talking point in the women's game is obviously the Ashes. And just how dominant Australia were. And one narrative was that the result was particularly surprising given how comparably well Australians and English players do in overseas competitions. And I think that's broadly fair. The difference really is just the volume of English players who get deals in overseas leagues versus the volume of Australians. I'm just looking now. I think 14 of the 21 overseas players currently signed in the women's competition are Australian. I was looking at the WPL most runs scored in the history of the competition. And the 3rd highest scoring English player is Sophie Eccleston. And I think there are 9 Aussies with more runs than Eccleston in the WPL. They just have such strength and depth.
Yeah, they do. And that feeds into such a sense of competition within the team as well. There's kind of that they're all kind of pushing each other, even when they're not being that much pushed from the outside. So, you get obviously the WBO is such a high standard, but even you kind of get that sense. And that's where the high standard of fielding comes from as well, where they're, each player is if you let that string to your bow drop a little bit, then there'll be someone else who's almost as good as you at everything else. And they'll be like, well, we'll go to them then. And actually you've seen this, Alana King, one of the stars of the Ashes, but wasn't a sure selection for Australia in all formats because of the other things that she couldn't do so well, despite being a genius with the ball in hand, really. So yeah, it's that they're so good, and we just saw that again this winter, and seeing Georgia Vole come in 21. I mean, is the gap going to get smaller or just get bigger when you've got players like that who are the next off the production line?
No, absolutely. And by the way, get involved in the comments. Ben and I can't see the comments, but producer Dan is going to filter through the ones that he likes the most. So please do get involved and be nice. Sometimes our YouTube comments aren't very nice. So a plea to be gentle, not just to us, but to the players that we're talking about. Birmingham Phoenix, another very good bit of business. They've picked up Emma Lamb, who is probably, now that Dunkley, Schofield and Knight have all been picked up right off the bat, Emma Lamb is probably the most established English batter. And looking at the squad composition of Birmingham Phoenix, even with Vole, that's what they're probably lacking at the moment, Ben. They've got Elise Perry and Stair Callis are probably the most established batters, as well as Amy Jones before the draft. Pretty good start to the draft for Birmingham.
Yeah, Emma Lamb's an interesting player because I've always been quite a fan. I mean, going all the way back to the days of the Kia Super League, she was like the success story of that first season as a player that you sort of found below that domestic level. But actually, she's kind of also she's played in all three formats. She's done she's done some impressive things. Obviously, she's got an ODI 100. She played a couple tests, but you can kind of see in her numbers that there might be a bit of that gap between the what she does in, domestic cricket below the 100 and then what she does in the 100, and also what's happened in the past kind of few years for her in the 100 versus what was a pretty promising start. She averages around 20, striking a decent-ish rate in the first couple of seasons of it. And then since then, she averaged 10 in 2023, 10.5, 10.6 again in 2024, sort of not scoring at the rate that you kind of want her to. She's one of those players, she's 27. She's one of those that if you're looking for pressure on the England team from outside, that England would be hoping, can she just have a standout season so that we have, like, as we've talked about with Australia, the pressure from the outside that makes the players in the team better. And so this kind of feels like a big season for her, and they've put a reasonable amount of faith in her, going for her as, sort of, second/fifth pick in the draft.
A second overseas slot has been filled, so 2 of the 4 now gone. This one, Manchester Originals have signed Deandra Dottin. Deandra Dottin retired from international cricket not that long ago, has come back and has been amazing to see her ply her trade in top level women's cricket again. She's so destructive with the bat and so incisive with the ball. And she joins a pretty fun cast of players at Manchester Originals. They didn't have a great season last year, just 3 wins from their 8 games, finishing in 6th position. But she joins Sophie Eccleston, Amelia Kerr, Beth Mooney, Lauren Filer, Eve Jones, Mahika Gore, Catherine Bryce, just to name a few. That's a hell of a signing. And actually, I actually thought she was the most likely overseas player to go today, given her ability with both bat and ball.
Yeah, and it's astonishing given how long she's been around. I mean, it was back in the early 2010s when she made this astonishing T20 100. Go and look up the scorecard. I won't take you through it, but go and look up the scorecard of Dawson's first T20 100, because it's well worth being like, how did someone do that? But given that she was doing that back then, you'd kind of expect the rest of the world to catch up. And it looked like that had for a time, maybe, like she wasn't getting the deals that she might have expected in that period when she was retired. But coming back into that T20 World Cup, she was again just like a class above as a six hitter, a class above the rest of the world. Basically, she was hitting more sixes by herself than most teams were managing in the competition. Add into that she can bowl, but it's she is a player who kind of stands on her own. She's not going to be the most consistent player, but for that Manchester Originals, they've got Beth Mooney, who's like one of the best anchors you can hope to have. They've got some other all-rounders down there, so you can sort of stand to have a luxury player who, over the course of an 8-team competition, you think an 8-game competition should win you 2 games by herself, maybe, and that would be a good return.
Yeah, we have a third overseas signing, so just one left now. Sophie Devine has joined the Southern Brave. Southern Brave, who have such a rich history in the competition, runners-up in 2021 and 2022. They won it in 2023, but were last in 2024. So understandably, a bit of upheaval there. They've released quite a few players, including Smriti Mandana, Chloe Tryon, Naomi Datani, Lauren Cheetle, to name a few. So Devine joins there. And I think when we're looking at the players retained, Ben, Southern Brave, I guess not that surprisingly, given they finished last year, look a little bit light in both departments. So I think it was always likely that they would target an all-round option, and Devine, fresh off winning the T20 World Cup with New Zealand, of course, is a pretty good get.
Yeah, and you might say, I mean, I guess because they've had George Adams there as that kind of experienced head who had, was a very like a core part of their win in 2023 and had a real struggle last year. So perhaps maybe Sophie Devine coming in as a not necessarily captain, but as a leader can kind of take some of the pressure off from that point of view. It's also interesting just thinking about this from a kind of draft dynamics point of view, if we can get nerdy like that, where you get to this point. So you get to this point, and as you say, not just have all the overseas slots bar 2 been filled, but the only 2 overseas slots left to go are to Southern Brave. So Southern Brave have the pick of the overseas players left in there. But to them it doesn't matter who they pick first and second, but who they pick first gets 36 grand in the case of Sophie Devine, and who they pick second gets 20 grand in the case of who we'll shortly find out that will be. And if that person, you think like, hang on, can we split the difference? Can we both be 28 grand, or is that not how it can work? But yeah.
Yes, as a good point. We've got a question from Tom Johnson, one of many loyal people on the Patreon. He asked, question for the guys, what impact will the women's restructuring have on the squads, if any? It's a really good question. I think, personally, I'll go first. With the wildcard picks, I think that's been a really interesting component of the men's competition, because there is quite a lot of attention on the T20 the men's blast in years gone by, and it's been a really interesting added dynamic to the blast. Lots of players who feel like they probably should have got gigs in the 100 have an opportunity to show that the franchises were wrong not to overlook them. I think that with the new domestic competition, there's just going to be more focus on what happens in the blast now compared to the Charlotte Edwards Cup last year. So I think it'll actually. I don't think the impact on the 100 will necessarily be a big one, but I think the impact on the blast, I think, will be a big one. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, possibly. I guess one thing as well is in terms of the money coming in, and also where you have um, these kind of slightly opaque. Obviously, you see the salary bands there; they're right in front of you. But it's like opaque what the council are playing these players, and whether that comes into it from a bundling point of view with the extra money that's kind of in the competition, if any of that is being used to kind of like slightly artificially boost your squad strength. So, for example, Kane Williamson at London Spirit, maybe he's sort of reasonably priced at 78.5k, considering, some of the other overseas players who are there above him. Like, there's not loads of overseas players who've got more than that, but still, it might be think that's a bit of a bargain. But then actually, he's also being paid partly by, I think, MCC to be an overseas player at Middlesex this summer. And you wonder if it's a bit of like, you can't play the 100 for this much, but we'll also pay you this much for this. And then we get to pick another guy in a different salary band. And, maybe some teams, if they're not making use of that, might look at it and think like, hang on, you're sort of overly strengthening your sides. But I think from an ECB point of view, they're thinking like, this gives us a stronger competition. Great. And from a player's point of view, they're thinking like, we get a bit more money. Great. So it's kind of, even though it might be a little bit below board, and this was a scandal in the BBL a few years back, was that the bundling there, especially in Western Australia, they just had the one team. But I think that it's kind of one of those kind of slightly murky things that sort of suits all parties. So we'll go ahead. But that's slightly more on the privatisation side. But I guess still, when you've got the counties who have this bit more ownership, you might see that in the women's competition, maybe at some point, but I'm not sure if we're there
yet. We have a final overseas slot. Chloe Tryon, the South African all-rounder, has joined Southern Brave in the 20k band. I guess another interesting aspect of the auction is just what you put your price at. I thought it was quite interesting looking at the list of South Africans in particular, and the South Africans pretty much obviously they had a really good World Cup campaign, came very close to winning the World Cup, had that amazing day against Australia in Dubai. A lot of South Africans who've got really good recent records didn't list a base price. So I guess there was a little bit more room for them to be picked up. Now that Tryon's been picked up, we have our 4 slots done, which means some really high profile players have not been picked up. So Alyssa Healy, who set a base price of 65,000, which is the top pay bracket in the women's competition, she's not been picked up. Kim Garth's been picked up. She was someone who I had down as a potential purchase, especially for a team looking for an all-rounder. Chanel Henry, Ben, fascinating story, West Indies all-rounder. She's not been picked up. Do you think that's a mistake?
It's tricky.
Do you just explain what she's done?
Let's go this story. Because if we were having this conversation, like 6 months ago, she'd be sort of nowhere near this discussion, I think. And then in India at the end of last year, she plays, the 2 best in her career, and one particularly in T20 cricket, and astonishing is where she's just smashing six everywhere. And it's kind of where's she been? She's been kind of around international cricket for a long time, and like a core member of the West Indies side for a long time without doing a whole lot, to be brutally honest. And she did a really good interview with Katia Whitney, and talking about how she reached sort of a crisis point in her career, had to kind of go home reset. She said that all she was doing was just hitting the ball tied to a tree. She kind of just rediscovered that love of hitting the ball, and that's kind of made her into sort of hot property. As you know, as we've seen in the IPL, you do well against India, you've got a pretty good chance of getting a deal in one of those two competitions. And then she goes to the WPL, and she has been, had a very good tournament there as well, doing the same thing that few players can do, which is hitting lots and lots of sixes in a short space of time. So if there were if this were a competition where it was 4 overseas slots, 3 overseas players per team, I could definitely see a team picking her up as kind of like a bit of a punt. But given if you've only got 3 overseas slots in your squad and you need those all three to be playing, I think
Yeah.
should be a little bit of a risk at this stage.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. We've had loads of signings in the last few minutes. Seren Smale, the English wicket-keeping batter, 20 years old. She's been picked up by Manchester Originals for £36,000. She's another person who I'd say really keep an eye on her. This summer, she made her England debut at the end of the English summer in 2024, playing in that series against Ireland. There's some discussion around who will take the gloves for England going forward in the future. Amy Jones has done the job for the last few years, but there's some pressure over her spot at the moment. Bess Heath has been in quite a few England squads recently, but there's some questions at just exactly what her role would be with the bat, and some questions about her ability with the gloves at the moment. So Smale is someone who could force her way into England contention very quickly. Rockets, their first pick was Jodie Grucock, a spin bowler who also backed. She's been picked up in the 100 previously, but she hasn't had a big playing role in the past. But she's someone who I know that Lauren rates very highly. And then there's been loads of signings in the last few minutes, actually. So Southern Brave have picked up Maddie Villiers. Really, really good business. That Villiers was at Oval Invincibles last year. She's someone who's played a fair bit of cricket for England. Again, she was someone who's involved in that Ireland series last year. Birmingham Phoenix have picked up Georgie Boyce. Trent Rockets have picked up Emma Jones, who's another name I'd say to really keep a close eye on in 2025. Emma Jones is at Surrey, but she's also part of this England pace bowler development program. And Jones, despite not having played loads of domestic cricket, she is seen as someone who perhaps in a way similar to how Lauren Filer went from nowhere to being someone who was opening the bowling for England. Jones has been viewed as someone who could maybe do that given the pace that she bowls at. And I've heard a lot of good things about her this winter. Northern Superchargers have picked up Grace Potts. Potts was a call-up to the England Test squad over the winter when there were concerns over Kate Cross's fitness. Over the Invincibles have picked up Phoebe Franklin, Welsh Fire, Katie George, and London Spirit, Izzy Wong. So quite a few high-profile English players there. The 12.5k picks are Josie Groves at Southern Brave, Marie Kelly at Birmingham Phoenix, Ellen Mocken at Manchester Originals, Eddie Threckald at Trent Rockets, Lucy Hyde at Northern Superchargers, Kalia Moore at Oval Invincibles, and Katie Levick at Welsh Fire. I'm going to say straight away, Ben, I think Katie Levick is a brilliant pick. If you're looking at English players with excellent records in the 100 over multiple seasons who don't play for England, Levick is arguably number one if you're looking at someone who fits that bill.
Yeah, and she's also just a great character to have in the 100 as well. Yeah, introduced her. She was quite vocal around some stuff at the start of COVID in terms of players being sort of left in the lurch and not really sure what was going on. And she was just, really punchy but eloquent, but also just someone who clearly speaks her own mind but has some fun as well. So she's great to have in. And yeah, as a leggy, a good quality leggy at that kind of price bracket, that is a really smart bit of business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just on Levick, last year 10 wickets at 15, economy rate of 7 for Birmingham Phoenix. So she's someone who you just absolutely know can come straight into a side. And to be honest, at 12.5k, that's really good value. Because you can be pretty sure that she's going to play a big part in their campaign next year. And according to the live blog, just to round off the women's draft, we've got Bethan Ellis at Birmingham Phoenix, Phoebe Graham at Southern Brave, Alice Monaghan at Manchester Originals, Ella Claridge at Northern Superchargers, and Rebecca Tyson at London Spirit. Ben Cook, ask the question, Ben. What do you make of the Phoenix bowling attack now they have added Megan Shoot? Yeah, that was something we probably didn't talk about enough earlier on. Shoot was a direct signing before the auction. She was associated with Oval Invincibles last year, so she joined her compatriot Elise Perry there. What do you make of how Birmingham Phoenix are shaping up, Ben?
Uh, yeah, I think they look all right. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, that the Shoot thing is obviously that's a big signing. I think it's interesting. Elise Perry in that top slot when she's having one of the all-time WPLs, but for a team that are struggling in RCB. But then you look at it and you can kind of trick yourself and think like how much of a rounder she is. I mean, Emily Arlett is a good person to have, and it's going to be good to have her alongside Megan Church from an England point of view as someone to learn from, I guess. But yeah, I think that
sorry, I was just going to say that I think Megan Shoot, her role in the 11 is effectively to replace Izzy Wong from last year. Wong only played 4 games in the end, but Elise Perry, we know what she does. Emily Arlott, we know what she does. Pavley as well. She made her England debut at the end of the English summer last year. 9 wickets at 18, economy rate of 7.2 runs and over. Hannah Baker, too, highly rated youngster. So they've got quite a lot of bowling options, but probably lacking for a bit of pace. So with Izzy Wong no longer at Birmingham Phoenix, I think Shoot is I can't really think of a better overseas quick to get in who was available for the auction.
yeah, that's true. And it's also like, do you need that extreme pace, or do you just need, someone to, who is so skillful in Shoot? And yeah, as you say, and it's one of the interesting things about these direct signing things, especially when there's so few overseas slots going. I mean, if Shoot goes into the sort of the draft, does she get picked up at a slightly higher price than 36K? Maybe, but then you also look at the names who haven't a deal at all, and you can see why you might want to go for one of those direct signing deals. And that's where we've also had some interesting sort of trades going on, haven't we? Where what London Spirit had to essentially choose between Harris and Lanning, did they? And then basically said we're going to go with Grace Harris, which obviously a big call over Meg Lanning, and she's going to cross the river to Oval Invincible. So that would be, add a little bit more intrigue to the London Derby when that happens this year.
But yeah, so the story there is Grace Harris played for London Spirit in 2023. And then in 2024, Harris was injured.
That's right.
Deepti Sharma comes in and was brilliant. She technically averaged 212 with the bat because she scored 212 runs and was only out once. But she was only out once in 6 innings. Scored her runs pretty quickly as well, striking at 133. Was their best 6-hitter as well, which is not necessarily something that Deepti Sharma is known for. And obviously not just a brilliant world-class batter, a brilliant world-class bowler as well. 8 wickets at 22, economy rate of under 7. So Deepti Sharma wasn't going anywhere. And the other decision they had to make was Georgia Redmayne, who isn't an Australia regular. She's an Australian, but she was player of the match in both the eliminator and the final last year. And she plays domestic cricket in Australia with Lauren. And just in their 50-over comp final last weekend, Redmayne hit 97, and she was only out because her partner nailed one straight, and the bowler got a boot on it, and Redmayne was out of her ground. So she's a brilliant player with pedigree in the competition. And Lanning had a slightly quiet year, only averaging 17. And I think overall was surprised that someone as good as Lanning became available in that manner. But yeah, I guess that shows just how competitive it is for overseas players at the moment, Ben, because a growing trend in women's cricket is that it's great that we have more franchise competitions, more T20 or 100-ball competitions, but because they don't really overlap with each other, the same relatively small group of players are the ones benefiting, if that makes sense. It's not as if in the men's game the T20 landscape is such a mess that there's opportunities for players low down the pecking order to pick up overseas deals. Where the women's game is at the moment, it's a relatively small group of 20 to 30 players who are hoovering up all the deals, 15 to 20 of whom are Aussies.
Yeah, and you look at one player in particular who sort of stands out as sometimes not getting the deals that she should is Sri Lanka's Shamari Atapattu, who there was a phase where she was obviously Sri Lanka's best player, but was sort of being their only good player as they were beating teams never have beaten before, basically, and was doing astonishing things, and yet was still not getting deals in in the WBBL in the 100, that kind of thing. She's not been picked up this time, and I think there was a WBBL where she was picked up as a replacement player later on, and then went on to be player of the tournament. But that just shows just how tough it is. And yeah, and also because it's not just the how few that there's not as many tournaments. It's also the length of them as well. So we were talking about the Caribbean Premier League, and that's going to overlap with the men's thing. It might have an impact on which players get picked up there. There's also going to be a women's CPL, but it's much shorter. There's fewer teams, so the likelihood is that'll be after the 100's done. So you don't have to think about that when picking a player up like Deandra Dottin. You can just be like, well, we're gonna, we think we're gonna have it for the whole thing, so we'll pick her. So that's also, it's not just that the tournaments are fewer, it's that, with the exception of the 100 and the WBBL, they're shorter too. So the overlaps are less likely as well.
100%. Cards on the table, folks. We have no idea when the men's draft is going to start. We think it's going to be really soon, but now's your time for questions. If you've got any questions, whack them in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them. Ben, let's look ahead at some of the trends we're likely to see in the men's draft. So just a reminder, in the men's competition, the squads are 16 players big. You have 15 players on salary bands, and you have one player for each team that's your essentially contracted player. So Jamie Smith, for example, Chris Wokes, for example. 37 men will be chosen to take to join the squads today. There are 10 overseas slots available and 27 domestic slots available. When we were looking at the squads earlier today, Ben, there was a really stark difference between the sides who finish in the bottom half of the table and the sides that finish in the top half of the table. Some of them are really thin, right? They've got a lot of work to do today.
Yeah, so well, basically, they don't have a bowler. They've got Chris Wokes in that England slot, and apart from that, they've got 6 batters. So they need to just go out and basically find any bowler that they can. Similar with Manchester Originals, I think 4 batters, 4 bowlers, so need a few of both. I think the team that I fear for a little bit is London Spirit, maybe, in that they really need to add some heft, but they've only got 2 slots of their top 6 available, so they're going to need to do that, but kind of on a bit of a budget. Whereas Manchester Original, who similarly struggled last year, for one, they've got an absolute steal of Heinrich Klaassen. So he's in the same salary band as Kane Williamson. And I'd say that, that's an exceptional bit of business to get Klaassen down there. They've got, a decent young core in their lower salary bands. They've got, 5 of their top 7 available to really add. I think they need some bowling firepower too. So I think expect some bowlers go early at big prices. It's interesting. So Mark was at the very highest price band, but I wouldn't be totally shocked if he goes in one of the first 4 picks. But that's what I'm looking out for.
So some of the some of the squads basically have not no seamers, but very, very few seamers. So I expect a lot of seamers to go. Question, Simran, do you think the Southern Brave will retain or should retain Rahan Ahmed at £200,000?
Good question. And I'd say, tricky. I'd probably say not. The only thing is that you look at their spin arsenal overall, and they've got Danny Briggs and that James Coles, who does bowl a useful bit of stuff, and there's some wildcard options there as well. But if you want a high class leg spinner, thing is Rahan Ahmed that right now that you can back to bowl your 20 balls in 100 as a leg spinner at any phase in the game and not get whacked? Or do you think there might be the game where it's not his day, and therefore do you actually want to go for someone a bit lower down? So it's tricky, but I think possibly not for him, but then maybe ends up going somewhere else. But yeah, that's what I'd say. And when you look at the quality of the players in that top brand as well, like these are either guys who are serious international stars or right on the a big players for England or in franchise cricket around the world. And Rahan Ahmed he's not quite that caliber yet. I mean, we're talking about him as a successor to Adil Rashid, but partly because England just have so few leg spin options, not because he's that close to Adil Rashid in quality yet. So I think I would say no, but I've been wrong about lots of things in the past.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Effectively, Southern Brave don't have, they had a good season last year, finished third in the league stage. They don't have Akil Hussein, who was very, very good for them last year. And Ben, a big difference between the 100 in 2024 to 2025 is what competitions the 100 overlaps with. So last year, the 100 had to compete with Major League Cricket for talent. That's not the case this year. Those two competitions do not overlap. But the 100 does clash with the Caribbean Premier League, which it did not coincide with in 2024. And last year, there were loads of West Indies players in the 100. Unlikely to see as many this time round.
Yeah, I mean, we might not see any, right? There's not been any who have been retained so far, and you've got to really think about this. Like, if you're a franchise, why would you go for someone? I mean, I know you can get a replacement player in, so maybe you might think if you get in, a Sunil Narayan or a Karen Pollard, that they can win you, 2 games in the first week, and then head off, and you get in someone who's not far off their standard. But actually, tournaments are won in the last week, aren't they? When you've got to make sure you're in that top three, but then you've got to win that one or two games. And so if you pick someone who you know is going to be able to do that, then you're pretty unlikely to do it, I'd say. So yeah, that does make a big difference. And then the other thing for Southern Brave is obviously that Vicky was saying, but they need an overseas player, but they've got only one slot in their top 8 available. So you're either going for sort of a more budget overseas down there, or you're using that top slot, which is where Rian Ahmed would go. So I wonder if they're going to go for a real statement overseas signing in that top spot.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, that the dynamics are slightly different. So in the women's competition, where most of the players picked up were towards the top, whereas if you use Southern Brave, for example, they might use it on the 200 grand pick, but they might use it much lower down because from slots essentially 2 to 8 are all covered at the moment. And similar for Over the Invincibles, they have 2 overseas players at the moment. Rashid Khan, who's a pretty handy signing at 120k. They've done well to get him at only 120k. And Donovan Ferreira, and all the top 6 plus central contract spots are taken up. So the most lucrative spot left on the roster for Over Invincibles is at 63k, which is unlikely going to be enough to get the better the superstar players in. Ben, we've had loads of questions in about James Anderson. Arnett asks, will Jimmy Anderson get picked up? The 42-year-old England's greatest ever Test match wicket taker is in the auction. Does it make any cricketing sense for a guy who's basically not played T20 cricket for the best part of a decade?
Look, I think James Anderson could definitely do a job in T20 cricket right now. You look at, the fact that, Dan Worrell is one of the London Spirits, their top signings, right? In their top salary brackets, and he is a not dissimilar model of bowler, and they could do a sort of a not dissimilar role where you get, especially in the 100, where James Anderson could bowl 15 of the first 20. And then then he goes and puts his feet up, basically, or 20 of the first 25, and he goes and puts his feet up. And that is even if you're 42 years old, you can manage 20 minutes of work every 3 days or so.
That's the thing, it's been a trend in the men's competition from year one, that there's probably more space for a more traditional English type seamer in the 100 compared to other white ball competitions, short form white ball competitions, including the T20 Blast, because of that rule. You can bowl 20 of the first 25 balls. So a new ball specialist like Dan Worrell can bowl loads at the very start of an inning. So if someone like Worrell, his relative weakness might be bowling at the death or bowling those difficult middle overs when you've got very few players in the ring and the ball's not swinging as much, well, they can actually bowl pretty much their entire spell. They can bowl their full spell in the power play if you so wish. So I think that Anderson actually has a reasonable shot, and especially considering a lot of these teams, particularly the teams that finished in the bottom 4 last year, are light on seam, and even the seamers that some of these teams have, they're not necessarily players who you'd expect to start. So if you look at Manchester Originals, for example, they have retained 4 seamers, but they are all young guys who haven't played a lot of T20 cricket. So although to be fair, James Anderson's not played a lot of T20 cricket, relatively speaking, over the course of his career. If you look at the bottom teams, I think there's definitely room for an Anderson style pick. If I was to guess, it would probably be London Spirit. I think they only have Dan Worrell and Richard Gleeson at the
But
moment.
given they've got Dan Worrell, though, if you're picking someone for the 20 out of 25 role, they've got the guy for that, right? So
Yeah, but I think given Anderson's age, he's not going to be
he's the backup. Yeah.
in as a main guy, I think. But that's a fair point. And the other more obvious option would be Fire, who at the moment only have Chris Wokes, basically. Again, a similar type of bowler to Anderson, but at the moment, Wokes is literally their only seamer, unless you're counting Tom Abel's more than respectable Meadows. I don't think he's going to be taking the new ball in 100. But by the way, related to the Manchester Original Seam attack. By the way, I interviewed Sonny Baker today, who is a lot of fun. He has got so much energy. And he was talking about being clocked at like 92 miles per hour in the winter and working with Andrew Flintoff. He takes a notebook with him everywhere he goes. And quite often when he's picking the brains of like a great former player who's now a coach, he just whips out his notebook, which he says gets a lot of raised eyebrows. But he's so certain that's what is best for him, and that's what's best for his development. That he does it, even though he gets the mick taken out of him by a lot of his teammates. But he's someone who I think could have a fascinating 2025. He's played one first-class game, and that was for the England Lions over the winter against Australia, and he impressed so much that he was handed an England fast bowling development contract for the summer. Essentially means that England have control over how much cricket he plays. Not total control, but they work more closely with Hampshire than they would be able to do for a player who's not on one of those deals. And we know that England are obsessed with pace at the moment, and Baker has been at speeds that are properly quick. I think quite often we're guilty of getting a little bit carried away with guys who might occasionally bowl above 85 miles per hour. But Baker is someone who is who's been clocked at 93 miles per hour. Friend of the podcast, Nathan Johns, has got in touch. Hello, Nathan. He says, find someone who loves you as much as Yaz loves his Lyon jacket. It's a good bit of clobber. That's all I'll say. Ben, we've got some breaking news. The men's draft will start at 4:30. So we've got 14 minutes to go. So if you're at home, maybe it's the time to get a cup of tea. But me and Ben aren't going anywhere. So if you've got any more questions, hit us up. I guess, Ben, one of the interesting things I was trying to work out before we started recording was who are the English domestic batters who might be targeted in the auction? Because, again, different to the women's auction, even the teams lower down in the women's competition last year, you could more easily see the core of a side for 2025. Some of the sides of the men's competition, they basically just ripped the whole thing apart and are starting again.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting ones that will be left will be Zach Crawley, who's been let go by London Spirit after a pretty torrid winter sort of across formats for England in Test cricket and then in the SA20 as well. But you still look at him and think that there is definitely a white ball opener in there. So he's one. You've got Jason Roy and Dowd Milan, sort of, well, not the other end of the scale, given that Zach Crawley's an established international at this point. But so you've got some experienced white ball players in there. Milan, especially, actually, probably flew under the radar. Had an extraordinary Bangladesh Premier League campaign. Showing that he can still do it, even against spin, when England looking for a few guys who can do that as well as retired from England. But still, you've got Joe Clark, who is still, he's in the hat. He, I think, would make sense. It was at the start. Welsh Fire was sort of pinning quite a lot of hopes on him at the start of the 100 as kind of a guy to build their tournament around. Didn't work out for them in that first season.
Policy for young batters, and it didn't really work out for them. A lot of really talented guys just all fell out of form at the same time, including Tom Banton, who has obviously had a great winter, getting himself back into the England squad for that India series and Champions Trophy. Played one game at the end of that India tour. We should probably go through some of the names of players available. So just a heads up, there are only 10 overseas slots. I can't say overseas at the moment. There are only 10 overseas slots available, but an amazing list of players. So the only player who has a reserve price of £200,000 is Noor Ahmad from Afghanistan, who had a brilliant SA20 over in South Africa. But then in the 120 grand category, some greats of the game: Shakib Al Hassan, David Warner, Adam Zampa, Andre Russell, Naseem Shah's there, Tikshana Sri Lanka, Andre Russell, Ravindra, Mujib, Kieran Pollard, Norkia, Sunil Narain, Shalab Khan, Josh Inglis for that amazing day out against England in the Champions Trophy, Shimron Hetmeyer, Matt Henry, who we will see a lot of, I think, in England this summer because he's at Somerset, I think, for the first 7 games of the Championship summer. And I think he's someone who's become, obviously he's been around for quite a long time, but he is someone who's become one of the best new ball bowlers in the world across formats, full stop. And I think he will probably get picked up. You've got Ramanella Gurbaz from Afghanistan, very exciting, explosive bat. And actually, when I was looking at the squads, even some of the squads, Ben, that have a lot of really good batting talent, I think the one thing you'd say a lot of the squads are low on is proper explosiveness up top. So there are some teams that look pretty good in that department. So Manchester Originals, who you mentioned, they have Josh Buttler, Phil Salt, Heinrich Klaassen, Matty Hurst. But some squads, even though they have got really good batters, they're more accumulators than particularly destructive players. So I think someone like Ramanullah is quite likely to get picked up. You've also got Lockie Ferguson, Fazal Haq Faruqi, Nathan Ellis, Sean Abbott. And then in the band below that, Mohammad Amir, Asalanka, Saeem Ayub, who had a brilliant winter for Pakistan before picking up an injury. Michael Bracewell, who I'd argue, Ben, had one of the all-time great ICC final performances in the Champions League, in the Champions Trophy final of the day.
Yeah, you had to sneak in a Champions League reference given Liverpool got knocked out last night. Yeah, he did, and he, that's the thing is that he has a brilliant all-round game every once in a while. And if you're a 100 team, you think, why can't he have one of those in 100? You brushed over Sam Ayub there. I really hope he gets picked up because he's great to watch. He was one of Pakistan have a lot of players who come through with a lot of hype and sometimes flash to see. He looked like he might be one of those until basically this winter when he just flicked a switch. He basically won them a series against Australia off his own bat. Did the same against Africa, I think, and then so it looked like he was going to be the guy to lead them into a home Champions Trophy at the top of the order as the new bright young hope of Pakistan batting, and then does his ankle on the first morning of the game, is out for a few months. Obviously, we know how Pakistan's tournament went, and we know how the tournament went as a whole as well as a Pakistan hosted thing. But he'll be back fit by that time, and he is a real talent. And then also, if you look at destructive bracket, and in the bracket further down, but you've got 2 Australians, Tim David and Jake Fraser McGurk, who I'd expect to get picked up by someone, albeit that that there is that awkward thing where you've got that 78.5k bracket. There's a few slots there, but it's like do the teams have overseas spots that actually you can think that there's loads of places these guys could go, and actually it kind of refines pretty quickly once you get through a few picks.
So I had Tim David down as a possible buy for London Spirit. So London Spirit finished bottom in 2024. Them and Manchester Originals just 1 win each. Welsh Fire with 2, and it's all change. London Spirit. So they got 6 spots to be sided today: 200k, 120k, 63k, and a few lower down. They've got Jamie Smith in as essentially contracted player, which is a great signing. Kane Williamson in as a direct signing. He will captain them as well, but loads of releases, pretty high profile releases as well. Andre Russell, Shimron Hetmeyer, Nathan Ellis, captain Dan Lawrence, Matt Critchley, Ravi Bopara, and Adam Rossington. So effectively that Essex core that was at the heart of the vibe at London Spirit in many ways has been totally ripped apart, and they are starting again. And if you look at who they've retained, they've got Ollie Pope, they've got Kane Williamson, got Keaton Jennings. Jennings had a good year last year, and Pope is someone who I think the more T20 cricket he plays, the better he will do. Very good players, but probably lacking a bit of explosive power. They've got Jamie Smith who offers that. I expect him to bat closer to the top of the order than he has done before. But I feel like Tim David is quite an obvious person to come in there. Some more questions, Ben. Hang on. Amber MCFC says Ravindra for 120k could be a bargain. He looks like a class player. Yeah, that could be a very good buy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is one of those who, and it's funny because he didn't look like a power player when he was first coming through. He was in that same under-19 quartet as Finn Allen, and there was a lot spoken about both of them. But you had Finn Allen as the guy who was sort of like the new age guy, and Ravindra who was the guy who his first name is supposed to be, who knows whether it's true or not, but a combination of Sachin and Rahul. As if this was the guy from the old world of batting, and then actually as it is, you see him in this Champions Trophy not just making hundreds at a rate in world tournaments that no New Zealand batter has done before, but also being able to do lots of different roles. So there was that thrilling sort of a power play assault on India's seamers in the final, even in the semi-final as well. He sort of took the attack to South Africa to begin with, which allowed Kim Williamson to bed in and then attack himself later on. So he's someone who you could put as an opener and say, go out and smash from ball one, and he showed he can do that. Or he's someone you can say, you're batting at number 3 and we're batting around you. So I can see that working. Obviously, some useful left arm spin, which you're not going to use every game. If you do come up on a track where you find that actually some left arm spinner firing it in is useful, he could be a guy to do that. So yeah, I think that could be a possibility in that 120k bracket for sure.
Dan says Originals had a poor year last year with not enough batters, often 7 to 8 bowlers, including Walter and Overton, and now they have neither. Hartley batting at 8 is comfortable, so need all-rounders at 6 and 7. Then Pelly makes a great point. I think this might be one of the stories of the men's draft. Pretorius would be a great pickup for any team. So this might be a new name to some people watching this. So Luan Andre Pretorius, I've almost certainly butchered his name, 18-year-old who basically made a name for himself in the SA20 just gone, looked so good, scored loads of runs, has been picked up, I think, for Hampshire in the T20 Blast already. But he looked at a level that I genuinely have never seen an 18-year-old do that well in a franchise competition as good as the SA20, I think, ever. He's got quite an unusual style. Our Wisden India colleague, Rahul Iyer, did a really interesting piece and really interesting video focusing on just how unique Pretorius's style is. He's a brutal 6-hitter and does so with almost no backlift at all, but still able to do so with immense power. Ben, he's not got a reserve price. Could be a good day for him.
Yeah, it could be. Obviously, your eyes do go to the top of that list when you're looking at the players available. But there's nothing stopping a team coming in. London Spirit coming in first pick and being like, actually, we want this guy who is 18 and we think might be the most the best young batter in world cricket. And it's one season of competition, but also this does sometimes tend to be the way that these franchise drafts and auctions go, where teams do like going for an unknown prospect who just might be the next big thing, rather than kind of the known quantity who you know what you're getting, especially if you're a team down the bottom of the table last year, where you're thinking like, well, firstly we've had to tear up the game plan basically, but also what we tried last year didn't work, and so we need to just do something different this year, and that can be taking a punt on something you don't know. And also it's worth saying with him, where it's very very early days, cross formats, but there are signs that he might not just be a pure T20 slogger, to be slightly derogatory, where he's got a list 800, or he's got 2 list 800s, one of which was included a brutal takedown of a South African international spinner, Mithasamy, and he's played one first class game, one first class innings, and he got 120. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely one of the players to watch. I guess where the 100 is different to, let's say, the IPL is in the IPL, you have overseas players who don't play. You pick up several more overseas players and take the part. So there's more room, I think, for picking up someone who's a a slight punt for the future than in the 100 where you only have three, and 99 times out of 100 you play your three overseas players. But again, where Pretorius is different there is I can totally see why a franchise would look at him and say that's not a punt. That's not a punt based on how he went in the SA20. Ben, we've not talked about one of the best stories of the auction list. Tell me who has a reserve price of £200,000.
Yeah, well, not many people. Not Noor Ahmed does from Afghanistan, but I think the guy you're asking about is Lancashire's Tom Bailey.
Is he the English Pretorius? Is he an 18-year-old wonder kid who's about to burst onto the scene and get into the England team?
No, but if you've followed county cricket, you've heard and you've watched Tom Bailey, who's been, one of Lancashire's most reliable county championship performers for a long time. One of these seamers who, is constantly just churning out wickets, but just at that level, not quite to, I guess, that speed, not quite to get into the England setup. But he's a red ball specialist, right? He's got 386 first class wickets and 80 combined across the two white ball formats. But he lists himself at the highest base price every year. As either it's a bit of a joke, you could look at it and have a bit of a giggle, or someone their finger slips on the button, or however the draft actually works from a technical point of view, and he all of a sudden has a massive paycheck in his pocket. So it's a win-win situation, and one that we quite enjoy.
Remember that there are 37 spots to be taken up in the men's draft. 27 of those are domestic players, 10 of them are overseas. You don't completely fill up the squads because 2 spots in each squad are left to the Blast wildcard players, where teams can look at Blast performances once the Blast group stage happens and pick 2 players each from that competition. The men's draft is imminent. We were told it's going to start at 4:30. It is now 4:30. I'm just looking at the 100 Live blog. It looks like we're nearly there.
I wanted to pick up on the wildcards that actually just wanted to say when we were discussing James Anson earlier that I wonder if he might not go in the draft because he's not played cricket for a little while and he is of an age where one injury and that could be it, and you don't want to sort of do that to yourself as a franchise. But if he gets through the start of the summer, a bit of county championship, and then through the Blast, which he says he wants to play for Lancashire, that could be the point where you go like, okay, fine, this guy's shown he's still as good as we know he is, and he can still do it in white ball cricket, and he's still fit enough to bowl the overs that we need him to, and we're going to go for it basically.
Yeah, I feel like I can completely get what you just said, but that's not the spirit of the wild slots in the plot. I think they were probably envisaged to be an opportunity for up and coming players who've yet to really caught the eye, to catch the eye in the Blast. I don't think it was necessarily meant for 42-year-olds, but yeah, I do see the logic there. I guess the other thing is the 100 is actually really far away, isn't it? Doing this 3 weeks before the start of the English season, but it's nearly 5 months away. The Blast has started. The Blast, the 100 draft has started for the men's competition. Jamie Overton has gone for £200,000 to London Spirit. Ben, Jamie Overton a few years ago was someone who was a fringe T20 player at best in his mid-20s. He's now someone who's playing for England in both white ball contracts formats, and he is someone who's now earning £200,000 at in 2025. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it follows a sort of the slightly puzzling, but in other ways completely understandable arc of his career, where you look at the raw stuff that he does, where he's a big boy, so he can and he can wang it down at real pace, and he can hit it really, really far, and not very many players in the world can do both those things. So you should be on the high on the list for a lot of franchises. But then you also look at the overall output so far. You look at him when he was on the field for England over the winter at times, where there was definitely some good things, but also some things where you're like, for a 30-year-old, you're still looking like a guy who's sort of finding his way and finding his roles at times, and you think like, what is what actually is the ceiling with this guy? Is he ever gonna reach that ceiling? I guess, but
yeah, I think. Sorry, so I think on Overton, I think he suffered a little bit with England struggling to find a balance to the side. More generally, I think there's a world in which he's a really destructive player, and you can be a little bit more canny as to when you use him with the ball. He's someone who, by the way, when he was at Somerset up until 2020, he basically didn't really bat. He batted 8, 9, 10, 11. Moved to Surrey partly to get more opportunities with the bat, and since then he's not really looked back. He's got a Andre Russell-esque strike rate. Obviously, he's not played in all the leagues in the world yet. But he is someone who has an amazing strike rate at the bat and is capable of bowling at 90 miles per hour. It's moving pretty quickly at the moment. Noor Ahmad has joined Manchester Originals. He joins Heinrich Klaassen there. He's the second overseas player signed for Manchester. Remember, he was the only person who was an overseas who signed themselves up at 200k as a reserve price. He joins Klaassen, who is another Super Giants man. Super Giants are now the owners of the Manchester Originals, or they own 70% of them, 49% initially, and they bought another 21% recently. So that's a really good sign. I think he was someone who actually had down as a likely Originals player, because not that many teams have 200k slots available. In fact, there's only one left after those two guys, and that's Southern Brave we'll come to shortly. So yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. He's immensely talented. Another bit of news: David Willey, also in the 200k band, has been selected for Trent Rockets. Ben, that's potentially a bit more eye-catching than Noor.
Yeah, I think they're both eye-catching in a way. Like I get what you're saying with Noor, but then I guess, and it's tricky because someone like Rashid Khan being 120k just puts this whole thing off in terms of who should be valued where. But you are strong. Like if I were to put the two Afghan spinners in one slot and in the other, I'd have them the other way around basically. But he is, he's a left arm wrist spinner, which is their gold dust in cricket, and he's a very, very good one. And Willie that's an interesting one, given what we were saying about who was going to be in that 200k bracket earlier and the kind of caliber of player you need to. Obviously, Willie has definitely been that at certain points, and he's in some ways a titan of the English domestic white ball game as much as he was a very useful player for England, close to being their player of the tournament in 2023 World Cup, although that's, a low bar to get, but still, he is a player who at his best can bat actually anywhere in the order, as he has done for Northants at times, can bowl, can be one of those guys who bowls 20 balls up front if you need him to, but is also more adaptable than that. So it's funny because in a way this is a ceiling pick as well, in that you're kind of backing him to be as good as he was at his best, and not to be, given that he's been sort of out of the England limelight for a bit and is towards the tail end of his career. But it's a pick I don't hate, and especially actually maybe at Trent Rockets as well, where Northants would use him as an opener when he could have a short boundary to target, and then he can hit sixes, and he can trust in his range to be able to do that again.
This is the thing is how much is his batting being utilised, because I don't think, as good a bowler as I think he is, he's not a 200k bowler. His in the 100 so far, he's not really been used that much as a top 6 batter. He averaged 12 with the bat in 2024 for Welsh Fire. In 2 years there, played 18 games, never got more than 35. So potentially signals a change of role, and we know he can be destructive on his day. He has a T20, two T2000s to his name, so potentially a signal to how he'll be used there. Southern Brave have picked up Michael Bracewell, I think, for 200 grand. He's timed his run of form well, hasn't he, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised by that. I think that's okay to say. But if he is as good a player every time as he was in that Champions Trophy final, then he's a steal at 200k. The thing is, we've seen throughout his career that has not quite been the case, and that's also Southern. I guess what it's interesting because Southern Brave, obviously Noor goes, but they basically had their pick of the overseas apart from that. But they also, as we were saying earlier, had either going for someone now or going for someone in the 52k bracket. But they are the choice of anyone, and I guess maybe there's a bit of profile stuff in there as well. They want a batter and top 6 and left arm spinner. But
possibly. I mean, we said earlier that Rahan Ahmed was an option there. They're replacing Akil Hussain, who did a good job for them last year, but we don't think is going to be available for as much this year. I suppose what I'm interested in is his bowling was really effective in 50 over cricket at that tournament where conditions favoured spin. There aren't that many finger spinners, conventional finger spinners, who are super successful in shorter form cricket. And it'll be fascinating to see how his bowling goes. I must say, I really rate him as a player. I think he's a brilliant player. I am surprised he's gone for that much. Maybe that they think that they need a spin bowling all rounder. And actually looking at their squad, their batters basically don't bowl. James Vince, Faf du Plessis, Lewis Deploy, Laurie Evans, Finn Allen. James Coles does bowl, but he spins it the other way. So maybe they think they needed a batting top six, top seven option who can also spin the ball into right-handers and away from left-handers. David Warner's been picked up at 120k for London Spirit. Ben is obviously not in the Australia plans at the moment. What do you think of him being signed at 120k?
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, David Warner feels very kind of 100 to me. I don't know quite what it is, but just he's like as a player who kind of he brings a lot of kind of T20 kind of heft and caliber, basically. Um, and that can kind of count for a bit in this competition where, as much as it's about it's about signing the best players. It's also signing about players who make this feel like a real T20 competition, and he does that. But it is an interesting one. He had a sort of he played a couple games in that ILT20, did very well in one of them. Had a good BBL campaign, so he's still got it, I think. It's just interesting that a guy, he's not played for Australia for a little bit. He's 38 years old, 38 can still command that kind of money. But you see him at his best, and you kind of get it, I guess.
Rachin Ravindra has been picked up for 120k. So you guys were right on that. And fast bowler David Payne will be at Sophia Gardens again in 2025. He's been signed for Welsh Fire in the 120k bracket. David Payne is someone who probably goes under the radar a little bit. I know he's played for England a tiny bit, but he was central to Gloucestershire's T20 Blast campaign in 2024. They won that competition. They weren't really fancy, but he was absolutely brilliant for them. A very canny left arm seamer. Lots of variations of pace, bowls from good height as well. I guess, Ben, that was one of the interesting subplots going into the auction. There were loads of seam spots available, particularly towards the bottom end of the 2024 table. And it wasn't totally clear who those guys were going to be when they were picked up. But Payne is an interesting but understandable selection.
Yeah, I think so, and especially as a left armer as well, they might think if we want to have a domestic guy who we think is one of the best left armers, and David Willey's just gone as well, then we've got to go for David Payne, and actually you have probably a wider pool to pick from right armers lower down, so you can think like, well, we'll get someone of a decent standard with the right arm. If we don't go for David Payne as a left armer, then maybe we're sort of we're having to drop down a little bit in quality.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, I just say David Payne last year was very good for Welsh Fire. Averaged 20 with the ball, economy rate of just 7.5. He alongside David Willey were both ever presence for Welsh Fire, and a reminder that Welsh Fire at the moment, at the very start of the auction rather, only had Chris Wokes, who was a bowler, so they needed to fill that up as a matter of urgency. So yeah, I think that makes sense for them to bring Payne back.
Ravindra, by the way, so he's a Manchester original, so that top three looks like being Salt, Ravindra, Butler. That's exciting. I like the look of that.
Yeah, so Salt, Ravindra, Butler. They also have Clarkson, and they also have Matty Hurst. So for a side that really struggled in 2024, our producer Dan's just sent us a message saying Dan is from Manchester and his team is Manchester original. He said we're winning the lot. Clarkson in the middle order. Yeah, Butler, Salt, Clarkson, Hurst, Ravindra. That's pretty formidable. But I guess it also does show the sort of strength of the competition that they had Salt and then Hurst, etc. last year. Butler missed the competition, but they finished seventh last year, and given how they're shaping up at the moment, they look pretty well placed for 2025. Yeah, I think Ravindra is a very exciting signing. He's someone who I wonder what analysts recommend with Ravindra, because his T20 numbers are actually nowhere near as good as you think, given how well he's gone in 50 over cricket. He's already got 5 ICC tournament hundreds. Had a really good start to the IPL in 2024, but faded away quite quickly. And actually, even before he burst onto the scene for New Zealand, his record in T20 cricket back home wasn't exceptional. So I think this is almost an endearingly old school philosophy to choosing a player. I think you're just basing on the eye. I personally can't see why it wouldn't work for Ravindra in T20 cricket, and also he helps you balance the side. He's a top order option who can offer quite a lot of bowling as well. What do you reckon is the biggest surprise so far, Ben? If you had to pick out one of the signings so far.
Oh, the biggest surprise. Um, I'm just trying to remember everyone that's been picked. I'm going to have to go for Bracewell at Southern Brave. I
Yeah,
think,
absolutely.
especially when we're talking about them wanting a left arm spinner, but and I know he's a better spinner than Ravindra, but you had you had Ravindra there if you want your Kiwi sort of left arm spin all rounder.
Mm.
So I think that is the one for me. But Bracewell, yeah, I think probably that. But it's been uh there's been a few though, to be fair. Like I was still a little bit surprised by Noor Ahmed, although I get it. And the thing is as well is that like uh there's so many players kind of in the hat. This sort of seems like an obvious thing to say, but there's so many good overseas players in the hat that you need to remind yourself that actually even someone like David Warner being picked up, it's not a total like guarantee that someone would go for him given the quality of players that are in there. So yeah, it's been quite a lot to take in, but yeah, Bracewell for me.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree. Although I think with Noor, it's also a good venue-based pick. Old Trafford has big, really big square boundaries in particular. It's known as one of the better places to bowl spin in England. So I think if any team was going to spend 200k on a spinner, particularly an overseas spinner, I think it was likely to be Manchester. Trent Rockets, by the way, have signed Lockie Ferguson, again, very established international. So yeah, they've gone Willie and Ferguson early on. Just a reminder of who they had in the first place: Joe Root, Marcus Stoinis, Tom Banton, Sam Cook, John Turner, Sam Hain, Tom Alsop, and Calvin Harrison. They're one of those teams that have a lot of slots to fill, but of the players they already have, a lot of those guys are players who you'd expect to do well starting. So I don't know. I found them one of the harder teams to work out what they might try and do at the auction. Um,
Yeah, and I think that if you're looking for, because you've also got to look at slightly surprising retentions, I think, as well as
yeah,
slots that are to be filled. And like Storn is one of those players who I obviously he's done loads of great stuff. He's won things, been part of a brilliant Australian side. I still think at 200k, I'm not totally convinced that he's 200k player basically. And that's someone who you've got in there as well. But then Banton is a nice player to have in there at 120k. I'm a big Banton fan, so yeah, it's an interesting side, and also interesting actually for them to retain the three players kind of at the bottom of their salary brackets. I think quite a lot of teams have kind of thought that they can maybe uh you might be able to pick a real bargain down there. And in a way, it's kind of a show of faith in someone
yeah,
like Tom Alsop to keep him
yeah.
there, I think.
To be honest, I don't think teams could do better than those three guys at the bottom.
Yeah.
Sam Hain is, one of the best batters, full stop. Who's not an England regular in England. Tom Alsop is a really interesting story. Someone who hadn't really done a lot in T20 cricket until last year, and then had a brilliant blast campaign down on the south coast, and gets a 100 deal off the back of that. And Calvin Harrison is a very decent leggy, and has been for a few years now. So I like that they've retained those players. A reminder, by the way, send us your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Zach Crawley is going up north. He's going to the Northern Superchargers. We talked about how exciting the Manchester Originals batting lineup looked. Some all-star names at the Superchargers. Harry Brook is one of their centrally contracted players. David Miller is already in as a 200k overseas bat, and joining them will be Zach Crawley Ben was saying before the auction that Superchargers were a team that needed to pick batters. Very good bowling attack going into the auction, but other than Brooke, Miller, and Graham Clark, they had no specialist batters.
Yeah, and I'm saying, yeah, Zach Crawley, time to learn to speak Geordie, and that's what he's going to have to do. He's heading up there. And like it's been a tough winter for him, but he's got to be able to crack this at some point. And yeah, maybe just a switch of team will be the thing that does it. He'll get obviously a good run of the side being an opener. Could we see a Brooke Crawley opening partnership? I know that Brooke has largely been a sort of mid-order batter in his white ball career to date, but when you see how good a player of pace he is, I guess the one thing is you might have two guys there who are really strong against pace and slightly weak against spin, so you might have teams opening with some spin against them possibly. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't feel right really to have, I mean, in some ways it'd be amazing to have Zach Crawley playing in the One Day Cup while the hundreds going on, just stroking 150s or nicking off in sort of county outgrounds. But it wouldn't feel right to have 100 without him. So I'm glad he's got a gig, and Northern Superchargers makes sense for it as a place for him and for them.
Yeah, no, 100%. Crawley, it's always almost baffled me that he's not gone up a level in white ball cricket. Because I remember, if you go back to the 2020 summer, so he scores that famous 267 against Pakistan, and then he goes back and plays a blast game for Kent, I think against a Hampshire side or a Middlesex side that had Shaheen Afridi, who was obviously part of the attack that he scored 267 against a couple of weeks previously, and scored an amazing 100. And at that point, how old would he have been? He would have been 21, 22. And this guy's just scored a test match 267, just scored a scintillating blast 100. At that point, it just seemed like a natural progression for him to become someone who's involved in England colours across all formats. It's just not quite happened for him in white ball cricket. He's had a few T20 gigs where he's done okay, but not brilliant. He's obviously captain England in 50 over cricket, and again has done okay, not done brilliantly. He is someone who obviously has a packed test schedule, and even someone as good as Joe Root has really struggled to nail all formats at the same time the last few years, especially given how much test cricket England play. But you feel with a good run, there's a really high-class T20 player in there in Zach Crawley. He's been picked up in the 120k bracket for the Northern Superchargers. Next up, Birmingham Phoenix have picked up Joe Clark. Birmingham have a very exciting domestic set of batters: Ben Duckett, Liam Livingston, Jacob Bethel, Joe Clark, Dan Mousley, and Will Smead, Andrew Donald as well. Interesting squad balance at the Phoenix. They've obviously lost Moeen Ali, who's not taking part in the 100 this year. He's retired from English domestic cricket, where all their overseas players are New Zealand quicks: Trent Bolt, Adam Mill, and Tim Southey. And Ben, something that T20 analysts and people who follow T20 cricket closer than anyone will say is that the overseas players picked for franchise competitions is often reflective of the domestic talent pool. So, for example, Ali Rashid, even though he's England's greatest ever white ball bowler, he has only ever played 3 games in the IPL, and that's because Indian domestic cricket has loads of really good spinners. So if you're looking for overseas spots, they tend to go to seamers and seam bowling all-rounders, really. Obviously, other players get picked up too, but just the supply and demand of it. It's quite interesting that a team like Phoenix have gone for 3 seam bowlers as their overseas players.
Yeah, it is, and kind of extraordinary to have 3 New Zealand quicks.
I'm going to have to stop you there because one of my favourite young players has been picked up for 120k. Ben McKinney has been picked up for 120k for the Manchester Originals. Again, Ben, he's someone who people might not have heard a lot about. We had him on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. He's 20 years old. He was on Sunderland's books as a footballer recently. Incredibly highly rated. Picked for the England Lions tour to Australia recently, even though that tour was not that successful for the team. A few young players really stood out. McKinney was one of them, scoring 100 against a very strong Australia A side. He's not played that much T20 cricket, Ben, but what an exciting talent he is. And also, he's gone to the Originals. So even more stacked, really exciting young batting talent there.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think how the original's going to fit this all in because
Yes.
they've got a top six that is absolutely stock full of talent. You actually want to, for Matty Hurst, actually, is he going to get the game time that his talent deserved based on last year? Maybe still just, but that is an interesting decision for him to have to make at some point. But yeah, he's hugely talented and he's the next big thing really at the moment as far as English batting is concerned. I mean, Graham Swan, who was on that Lions tour, was saying that, McKinney's kind of ready for Test cricket right now. He's getting to the top level in a different sense, and also just what a day from
Bang
think about
bangs.
what exactly that's it. Like,
Yeah.
how old is he? He's what, 20 years old, and he's now got 100k. How many 20 year olds do you know with 120k in their back pocket?
Yeah.
What a day.
On.
Can I
Yeah.
talk more about New Zealand quicks? Is that all right, or should we talk more
Sorry,
about McKinney?
just moving on. There's quite a lot of McKinney chat in the comment section. So Andy McLaughlin says he's going to be in the Ashes squad. I think it's very, very possible that McKinney is in the Ashes squad. If you haven't seen him bat, he reminds me a lot of Trescothick. Very tall, powerful, not a lot of foot movement, great hand-eye. And he's someone who, even before he played that Lions tour, people thought that he has a game that's suited to Australian conditions. As I said, if you want to know more about McKinney, you can hear from him on the Wisdom podcast from a couple of weeks ago.
We might actually, as we
And
might have had a bit of a goober on the 100 live blog where they've changed the name Ben McKinney to the name Lewis Gregory. So we might have just given, Ben McKinney suddenly, is a 120 pound
oh
poorer.
no,
Yeah,
no way.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh no. So yeah, it's Lewis Gregory at Manchester Originals. I don't think Lewis Gregory is going to be opening the batting for England.
in the
Um,
Ashes, no, yeah.
oh,
Unless they make the same sort of mistake, yeah.
yeah. So we got very excited for something that didn't happen, and that makes actually quite a lot more sense from a squad composition perspective,
Yes.
even though it's not as exciting. I mean, Lewis Gregory, I'm actually quite surprised he wasn't retained at the Rockets. He's someone who is widely regarded as one of the best captains in English cricket. Obviously offers you something with the bat and the ball. That is a shame. That is a shame. I got really excited by McKinney being at Manchester for 100.
So,
You can go back to New Zealand quicks now, Ben.
well, New Zealand quicks. So first thing is to have three New Zealand quicks and for Matt Henry to be unsold altogether feels like a bit of an oversight from a competition point of view. But then also we're now through the 120k brand, aren't we? So actually you can chalk off quite a few names who aren't going to be in the 100 at all. So Majid's not going to be there. A couple of West Indians, so I think we kind of knew because that. But so Glenn Maxwell, he was at the 120k brand. He's not been picked up. I think I'm right in saying.
I think he pulled out early today. Yeah.
Ah, fair enough. Well, then that makes a bit more sense. But Josh Inglis, another one, 120k, is not gonna be in it. And also we went through the 200k band, and no Mark Wood. Is that right? So Mark Wood won't be in the 100 either. Which I guess you might make sense from a team point of view if you're thinking sort of from a point of view of might England actually pull him out of the 100 when it gets to it if he plays quite a lot of this series and then they want to give him the Ashes and that's the time for him to get a rest. That might be why, but still makes the 100 a bit of a poorer competition. But yeah, Matt Henry, I think that was one guy, he's going to be in England already, having playing for Somerset as a brilliant overseas on that. I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of gets a game here or there as a replacement player,
Yeah.
basically. But if he's in the One Day Cup, wow.
No Adam Zampa, right, as well?
Yeah.
No Naseem Shah. I guess what you'd say for Matt Henry is, I think, and I might be wrong, Dan, correct us if we're wrong, only Lockie Ferguson has been picked up as a specialist quick from the 120k and 200k bracket. So again, it's often in drafts, if you're not picked up, it's not a reflection necessarily of how franchises view you. They're looking to fill specific slots in the squad, and between the 8 teams at the moment, only one squad, I think, has opted to pick a specialist seamer at this point who's overseas. So yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, some huge names. Adam Zampa not being picked up, I think is very interesting. But yeah, I still can't get over that Ben McKinney is not going to the Manchester Originals for 120k. But everything we said about him is still true, and you can still watch the interview with McKinney on the Wisden podcast from a few weeks ago. He was really good to talk to.
And to be fair to us, we didn't even flag that it seemed like an odd pick from a they have a lot of batters already. What was it going to mean for Matthew Hurst?
Okay, no, Ben, gonna stop you there. McKinney has been picked up by Manchester Originals again for 78.5 grand. So actually, what we said initially is still sort of true. It's quite hard to work out how their top 7 will look.
Yes, it will. Yeah. But it means we can, look. I wonder if that was the original plan, or if they were like, oh crap, he must be feeling really bad now. We've got to get him in at something. And 78.5k for a 20-year-old is still not bad. It's not 120k, but I think he would have taken it at the start of today. Yeah,
I'm trying to work out what their top 7 is likely to be. So Butler, Salt, Clarkson,
Ravindra,
McKinney, Hurst. Okay, that I think, unless I'm forgetting someone, that is only 6 so far. So that's just a stacked top 6.
Yes, but and then also Gregory at 7.
Yeah. Gregory at 7 and Hartley at 8. That for me
looks pretty good. Yeah.
So I guess I think that is like one of the exciting things in a draft is a team can go from getting 1 win and 8 and suddenly having possibly the most stacked top 6, top 7 in the competition's history.
What it does mean though is that you're needing 20 balls a lot of the time from your Lewis Gregory. There's not Ravindra can bowl. I guess he can bowl a bit and give you a bit of a release option, but actually the others in that top 6 don't. So that is something for them to consider. But you have seen teams that go in with 6 batters, 5 bowlers and be very successful, especially when you do still have the batting depth in there in Gregory and Hartley a bit as well. So yeah.
Good point here by #MyCricketGear. Actually, as Originals get last 120k pick and the first 78.5k pick, it was up to them who they wanted to pick in which order. They had consecutive picks. The 100 blog just obviously got those in the wrong order.
But another funny bit of draft dynamics where with no difference to Manchester Originals, it could be McKinney on 120k and Gregory on 78.5k. I guess McKinney's going to earn a lot of money over the course of his career, and Gregory he's all he's done pretty well for himself, but he's probably not going to be in that Ashes squad. So yeah.
A man who has previously been part of the Manchester Originals but won't be this year is Paul Walter, the very tall left-handed all-rounder, will be at Welsh Fire for 2025. He's in the 78.5k bracket as well. A reminder that Welsh Fire very, very light on bowling. The batters that they picked up originally, Luke Wells is the only one of those realistically who's going to bowl in a 100-ball competition. Luke Wells, interesting story in that been a county player for years and years and years, and his leg spin was basically not used until relatively recently, and it turns out his leg spin is very handy. Tall Paul Walter joined Welsh Fire for 78.5k. I always think he's a very, very handy T20 player. His numbers might not look great a lot of the time, but he does really difficult roles with bat and ball, often bowling and batting in the middle overs. I think particularly with the job he does with the ball is very, very few teamers in England, I think, pull it off as well as he does. And he's got long levers, hits a long ball, and especially at Sophia Gardens, you've got very, very, very small straight boundaries. So he could be a handful there, Ben.
Yeah, he could be, but I still think that he's an all-rounder, but in T20 cricket, he's more of a batting all-rounder, you'd say. And they do need to, start picking up some right arm quicks, sharpish. But I don't think it's ever a bad decision to sign Paul Walter. So if you've got down to that point and no one's picked him up yet, fair enough to go for him, I'd say.
He's got his record with the bat in the 100 isn't great. Averages 13 from 28 games at the Originals. With the ball, it's a bit better. Averages 19, but didn't have a great year with the ball last year. Averaged more than 40 and had an economy rate of more than 10 runs and over. So understandable why Manchester might have wanted to change there, but brilliant T20 player who's done well in the Big Bash in the past. with the Brisbane Heat. Took wickets for them, took 17 wickets for them at 17 a couple of winters ago, in a very successful personal campaign there. Max Holden has joined the Trent Rockets. Holden joins the likes of Joe Root, Stoinis, Tom Banton, Sam Hain, and Tom Alsop in the batting department. I'm slightly surprised he's been picked up this early. Really good player, but he's gone probably earlier than I would have expected.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. When you look at some of the players still sort of left in the hat at this level. I mean, we've mentioned Jason Roy and David Milan. You've got Adam Lyth as well as a hard hitting T20 player. There's quite a lot of batting talent that you'd go for. And so as good as Holden is, it is a slight surprise. But part of this is about making punts, making these sorts of decisions. And if they see something, I guess it's interesting to know as well how much franchises are thinking about the future in these things, because those guys mentioned before, they're going to be 1 year type players, but you do get a draft each year, so you might be able to get whoever is the young player at that band next time around, or maybe you want to think like this guy could be really good, so you want to lock him in. It's interesting.
Yeah, Holden is someone who's had he's changed how he goes about his batting in T20 cricket. So up until 2023, really, he was someone who struck at around 125, 130, but he's really shifted his tempo with the bat. So in 2023, he averaged close to 40, but perhaps more interestingly, he struck at 185. And although he wasn't quite as destructive in 2024, he did still strike at 160. So that's pretty much 10 runs and over. So again, this is not a T20 competition, right? It's slightly shorter. So perhaps players who've got evidence that they can strike slightly quicker than the mean for a T20 top order player, a little bit more interesting, I suppose. So yeah, an interesting pick. And he's someone as well who got picked up in the ILT20 for the last 2 years, but in a 4-game stint this winter did very well for the Desert Vipers. 230 runs at 76, strike rate of 140. One England opener got picked up by the Northern Superchargers earlier in the day, Zach Crawley. Another one, sort of, Dan Lawrence, up too. He's been picked up for 78.5k. Again, I'd actually put him in a very similar bracket, Ben, to Zach Crawley as a T20 player. He's someone whose natural talent almost screams T20 player to you, like high class T20 player. And even though he's very good, he's not quite hit that level of getting all the big franchise gigs. He's yet to play for England in white ball cricket as well. An interesting signing in that obviously all the talent's there, but we haven't quite seen it yet in T20 cricket, in 100 ball cricket.
Yeah, but when you look at the upsides for him and for Crawley, I'm starting to like the look of that Superchargers batting lineup, to be honest. I mean, you've got those two, Miller and Brook. That's pretty handy. You obviously got Graham Clark, another plug for the Bangladesh Premier League. Had a brilliant competition there. And I think they kind of had to go for batters, given that they had Adil Rashid, Ben Dwarshuis as an overseas option, Santa was bowling around Karsan Potts as well. Their bowling was pretty good, so they had to go for batters. And it's interesting that they've gone for those two, as you say, not nailed on T20 players, but guys who will have a point to prove for sure, and who it just should work, especially, but should work in different ways, right? Crawley's such a pure ball striker. Not to say that Lawrence isn't, but he also he's got those wrists that can enable him to access areas that other batters can't. So I like that blend, even though, as you say, on paper it's not got the that reliable T20 sort of heft of some other teams.
What's quite interesting, I think, as well, with not just Lawrence, but a lot of players who are a similar age to him, who've been in the 100 since its first year, is that the 100 now is not that new a competition, and it is obviously agreed that this is a higher standard competition than the Brass. It's more condensed in terms of talent pool, higher profile overseas players, certainly in terms of how they're spread out across the teams. And Lawrence is one of a number of really highly rated, really talented young English players whose record in the 100 isn't as impressive as you'd think it is. He's played 25 games in the competition across 4 seasons, and he averages 18 at a strike rate of 130. One of the interesting things, which is the flip side of a conversation we were having earlier on, is just how difficult it has been to open the batting and face the new ball in the 100. There was a theory going around a couple of years ago that the H that is engraved on the ball makes the ball swing more, because batters were basically saying that the ball swings more in the 100 than it does in other competitions, and the only thing people could think about being different was the H on the side of the ball. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And Lawrence as well, obviously his off spin is very, very handy indeed, increasingly used by Surrey in all formats. Trent Rockets have picked up George Linder, another pod favourite, the South African all-rounder, bowls very, very handy left arm spin and can whack it at the depth as well. Different player to David Willey, but sort of a same sort of flavour of player to David Willey, an all-rounder in his 30s who doesn't play a lot of international cricket at the moment, but very reliable without being, I guess, X factor in either discipline.
Yes, I agree, but I think it's a really smart signing. I mean, when you're getting down to that level as of the bracket in the draft, you're not going for the star names, but you want someone who can sort of fill in and do a job. And whenever I watch George Linder, actually, I think he makes sense as a T20 cricketer, actually in both disciplines. Obviously, it's the bowling that sort of stands out, where he has that kind of canny left arm spinner, but actually that can kind of do him a disservice. Like, he can be he's smart. I think he can fire it in, but he can do a few different roles. But actually, you look at the T20 batting record,
Good.
and he can he averages 20 strikes at 135, 136. That's really solid. And I feel like he's got better as well in the last few months, maybe year or so.
Well, he had a brilliant SA20.
Yeah,
brilliant SA20. He went at just over run a ball, an average 17 with the ball, and then with the bat he averaged 40 and struck it above 150 for Mumbai Indians Cape Town. So he's someone who, I think we make a mistake often in talking about players, is just assuming that they plateau at a certain age, but actually players develop and improve at different levels. It's not a video game where if someone is this good at 21, they're going to be that good at 25. Players, I think we're seeing that, originally T20 was seen as a young man's game, but I think increasingly we're seeing that the value of knowing your game inside out. So I think George Linder is a really canny buy. He's someone who I think fits that bill of someone who's slightly further on in their career, but is actually improving at the moment. As I said, he's just come off his best domestic South African T20 season yet, and he's represented South Africa in all formats. Ben's disappeared, but I've been told he's going to come back in a minute or two. Before we move on, a reminder that we have a flourishing Patreon page. You can join from just £5 a month plus VAT. You get a episode after every game of England international cricket. So every time the men or women play a day of cricket, you get a podcast that goes straight into your feeds a few hours after the play finishes. And there's an additional weekly show every week. So on top of our 2 weekly podcasts, the men's and women's weekly podcast, you get an extra show on the Patreon. 2 regular features are Joe Harmon, the Wisden Cricket Monthly magazine editor. He does an interview series where he sits down with a particularly interesting person within the game and talks through their career. So in the last few months, we've had Rob Key, we've had Graham Smith, the obviously great South African opening batter. We've had Charlotte Edwards, Graham Onions, Darren Milan. Last month, Joe, on Valentine's Day, spoke to his first cricketing love, Carl Hooper. That was a great chat. We're also doing a monthly series where we look back at previous Ashes series gone by. We're doing one Ashes series at a time leading up into the Ashes. Last week we did the 1998-99 Ashes series that was won by Australia, obviously, but it was much closer than people probably remember. Australia won it 3-1, but going into the final, day of the series, England could have levelled the series and make it 2-2. And what's quite interesting about that tour is that is comfortably the second best England have done in Australia over the last 35 years. So that was a very interesting series to look into. Ben's back, which
I go to the toilet for 2 minutes and Yaz is talking about 98, 99 again.
Yeah, but no one's been signed up in the last 7 minutes.
Okay.
That was a perfectly timed break for you. But yeah, we're just talking about the Patreon, Ben. Do you want to talk about the Patreon community? Because I think that's my favorite bit of it.
Yeah, no, it is great. The chat that goes on there, honestly, it's kind of become my second screen a little bit when England are playing. I'll be on there more than I am on Twitter. Not more than I am on Slack and answering work queries, but I guess a close third after the TV and then that. But yeah, it's great. There's always loads of good stuff on there. Good discussion, flagging things that we occasionally haven't seen. We have really interesting discussions based off the back of it. I really, really like it. I was thinking when I went to the bathroom, what is Yaz going to be doing? I didn't think there was a chance you were just going to be reading off some teams from old scorecards. But no, you've stuck
Yeah,
to you've gone to the Patreon.
To clarify, we do that a lot on the Patreon, but it isn't. We don't just start recording and I just read off list of names. Quite often when we do our historical deep dive, you stumble upon a particularly interesting set of names. One of my favourites recently was like a Queensland team that England played during the 98-99 Ashes. It was full of star names. Do we have any more names? We still don't have any more names. So they're obviously taking a break. It's been 8 minutes. Again, a reminder: send in your questions. I've just been tagged in something on Instagram from My Cricket Gear, who has a new 100 ball and asked the question: does it swing more? It's not an H really. Well, it is. It's an H where half of the H is in the shape of an H, and then the other half is the letters THE. We have another question in. Pelly asks, George Garton would be a good signing for the Superchargers. Thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, I can see it as a yeah. I guess the only thing is no, I can see that making sense. I've been enjoying Pelly's chats, Pelly's contributions in general. I've just seen another one saying, could Archie Vaughan be worth a try? I really like the sound of that, actually. Obviously, we saw at the end of the county championship last year where he kind of became an off spin for Somerset almost by accident. Where but it's really, really useful off spin. I mean, obviously, it's all been done in county cricket so far, but it isn't in the championship. But I could see it as a white ball option, as an option, basically, as a bit of a punt lower down for sure. But yeah, George Garton, obviously, he's had an interesting career where he was a new Mitchell Johnson when he sort of was kind of in an Ashes squad, but not really back in 17, 18, I think.
Yeah.
Then plays a bit for England, plays in the IPL once, does he? And then it's kind of just been up and down. But because of how he bowls and the fact that he can hit it as well, has always
An
sort of been
amazing
attractive.
fielder, amazing fielder as
Yes,
well.
good point. Yeah.
Good person to have in your squad. The 63k bracket has started. London Spirit go first, and they pick up Luke Wood. I guess fascinating auction dynamics, right? Like Luke Wood and David Willey as T20 bowlers right now. You wouldn't say there's a lot different between the two of them. And David Willey, we know he can be a destructive T20 batter, but it's not something he's done an awful lot of in the 100. And Willie goes for 200k, Luke Wood goes for 63k. I think that's a really good deal for London Spirit.
Yeah, 100%. And for a team who have been not totally convinced by some of their option strategy so far, but actually when you look at it now, that pace tag that they're going to be able to field, they've got Gleeson, Stone, Wood, Overton. There's a lot of pace that they can get in there, and then you've got Dan Roll to put some new ball skills in the row. The only question is how do they fit all these guys into a team, into an attack? How do you pick, I guess, 3 or 4 from those guys, and are they a little bit light on the spin side of things, and who are they going to go for from there? But yeah, Luke Wood is always a player I've had some time for, and yeah.
Bowls really quickly. I mean, we had a question earlier about the balance of their batting lineup and perhaps not as destructive as it could be. But I think it's interesting to see a team almost do the flip of what Birmingham Phoenix have done, in that all those quicks that you reeled off, Ben, they're all England qualified. So they've not used an overseas slot for any of their quicks. Obviously, podcast favourite Liam Dawson is also at London Spirit. He's one of their 200k players. So yeah, a really good English core at the Spirit. And obviously they got Jamie Smith as well. George Garton, who we're talking about just a couple of moments ago, formerly of Southern Brave. He's joined Manchester Originals. So the Originals have another very exciting player. They're looking increasingly formidable on paper. And again, Ben, we're talking about all-round options for them. Garton is someone who bolsters that a little bit. You could, in theory, have Garton at 8, Tom Hartley at 9. So, loads of batting depth at the Originals if they want it.
Yeah, and that fills out their roster, doesn't it, as well? And I guess the only thing is, looking at it, you might say they're a little bit light on the bowling side when you compare them to some of the other teams and the options they've got there. But George, his ceiling's really high, and some of the other bowlers they've got. If you can get a season out of Josh Tongue, then that's really healthy. As you've talked a lot about Sonny Baker already. Tom Hartley as well as I think a bit of an underrated white bowler. So I think that team, I'm excited by it. I'm not saying that I'm looking at it and thinking they're definite title challengers yet, but I think that there's a decent chance they'll be up there if a few key players click, basically.
Yeah, I think like Tom Hartley is someone who's quite a misunderstood cricketer because he sort of came out of nowhere before his Test selection. But his first England limited over selection was entirely on merit in terms of he was the highest performing young English finger spinner in white ball cricket. And he's got a good record in the 100. He can bat, very good fielder. So yeah, I think that's a really, I'd agree with you there. It's not a perfectly balanced team. And I think how they go is almost not dependent, but a lot of it will depend on how well the young seamers in Josh Tongue and Sonny Baker do. Those guys are two of the most exciting young quicks in the English game, both capable of hitting 90 miles per hour, but both have had their injury problems and have played that much T20 cricket. So very interesting, very exciting squad, I think, Manchester Originals. If I was a Manchester Originals fan who's getting tickets to go and watch them at Old Trafford, I'll be very excited. A lot of box office cricketers in that squad. Do we have some more correspondence? Remember, you can get your questions in on the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Jose Az says Mark Watt getting slept on.
Yeah, I agree. Mark Watt always does brilliantly for Scotland in T20 competitions against some of the best players in the world. Always goes for 1 for 23 off his 4 overs. Can bat as well. He was at the Oval Invincibles last year, by the way, but didn't get much game time. Adam Zampa and Nathan Souter keeping him out the side. Souter, one of those players who just does really well in the 100 year after year in the Oval. Good thing going. At the moment, they obviously won the competition in 2024. So didn't get much game time last year, but I think if teams, again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, it's not whether a player gets picked up or not, it isn't based on how good a team thinks they are. It's how suitable they think they are for the holes they have. And it may just be that some of the teams aren't looking for a spin bowler, a domestic spin bowler who turns the ball away from right-handers and into left-handers. But yeah, he's someone I'd love to see get picked up again. Another fast bowler at Wells Fire, which we predicted because they didn't have any other than Chris Woakes before the start of the auction. It's another overseas player in Riley Meredith. Ben, he is rapid.
Yeah, he is. And again, there's a slight element of he's not done loads of stuff. He's not an absolute nailed-on starter for Australia in white ball cricket, but he is so quick. And I just think remembering back to Spencer Johnson lighting up, who'd been a sort of similar stature of pick when he got into that Oval Invincible side, and then bowls that incredible spell alongside Gus Atkinson. Left arm wheels. Obviously, Meredith's a right armer, but still, yeah, he is very, very, very quick, and that is a fun pick, I think. There's a lot to like there, and a guy who actually has only played 7 games for Australia, but actually played a lot of T20 cricket. He's played 114 games, 145 wickets. Actually, he's not not as expensive as you get some guys who are in that kind of out and out speedster role. So yeah, I think that's a good buy at the kind of the lower end of the overseas slot price bracket.
Yeah, he's been one of the most important teams in the BBL for years, more than 100 wickets. In that competition, he's played a bit for Somerset and done brilliantly whenever he's played for Somerset. 14 wickets in the blast, goes at just 7.5 runs and over. And also, I guess, a sign of how highly rated he is in leagues across the world. He's someone who's played a fair bit in the IPL. He's played for Punjab Kings initially in 2021 and then Mumbai Indians in 2022 and 2023. A tad expensive, but we know that the IPL the scoring rates there have just gone through the roof in the last few years. So I think that's a really good bit of business, actually, getting an overseas quick with the pedigree of Meredith just in a slightly lower pay bracket. I think they've done very, very well there. Similar to how I feel about Luke Wood. I think Luke Wood is a bit of a steal, I think, to be. We're effectively getting to the second half of the pay brackets, as Ben said. Manchester Originals have actually used up all their spots in the auction at the moment. Just sort of telegraphing what we're likely to see for the rest of the auction. London Spirit have 3 spots left. Manchester are done. Welsh Fire have 4 more. Trent Rockets have 2. The Superchargers have 2. Birmingham Phoenix have 2. Southern Brave have 2. And Oval Invincibles have 3. So Welsh Fire, the busiest team from now to the end. Manchester Originals, they can put their feet up because they're done for the day. But yeah, progress is a lot slower, Ben, for the men's auction than it was for the women's draft. It was very, very quick. It's about 4 minutes between each pick at the moment.
Yeah, I guess that there is a larger pool of players to pick from. I guess that could be part of it, and especially also early on in the men's draft, it felt quicker than now. But actually, not that they have to do it this way, but it felt like they were going from those higher sort of reserve price brackets, especially for the overseas players. And so that there's a little bit less scrolling time, and also that there are so many players. There's actually 2 Matt Fishers in the list. There's a New Zealand overseas called Matt Fisher, yet to play for New Zealand. There's obviously the he played the one test wonder for England a couple of years ago. So you don't want to pick the wrong Matt Fisher. So you've got to make sure you get the right guy, and that could be why too. There's just a lot of scrolling to do basically before you go and click select.
Yeah, I like the idea of there being someone at 100 HQ right now who's watching us on the live stream, and they're relishing the idea of making our lives just a little bit more difficult by having these enormous gaps between each pick. If the gap is going to be this big, again, folks, get in touch with your questions and your comments because it looks like we're going to have loads of time to answer. We have another fast bowler. There's another Aussie, Jason Berendorf, has been picked up by the Oval Invincibles again for 63k. He's their third and final overseas player. He joins Rashid Khan and Donovan Ferreira. Ben, you mentioned Spencer Johnson and the impact he had at Oval, I think 2 years ago now. That's a good signing.
Yeah, it is. It's less sexy than Spencer Johnson. But we saw in that 2019 World Cup what he can do in English conditions. And actually, I wonder if we talk a lot about these guys, an option for that for a new ball heavy spell, given that they've got other options there. They've got Gus Atkinson who can do that. They've got obviously Mahmood as a quick bowler, but actually as someone who can bowl at a lot of different points in the game. He broke open that 100 final last year with an electric over sort of when you're transitioning from the middle to the death, and he just kind of swung the game decisively in Oval Invincible's favour. They've got a couple of guys, Sam Curran, Tom Curran, who they might see more as death options. So actually going for a new ball specialist again as a sort of a cut price overseas makes a lot of sense, and that's what they've got there in Jason Berendorf, I think.
Yeah, he's in that group of Australian quicks who probably don't get enough credit because they're in the slipstream of the big 3 who play pretty much every major competition for them. He's another one who's good enough to have played a pretty significant amount of IPL cricket, 29 games, all for Mumbai Indians actually, and in the 2023 IPL had a good IPL, 14 wickets at 27, gets picked up in pretty much all the leagues. He's played a bit in England, he's played for Sussex, he's played for Middlesex, played in the Lanka Premier League, bit in the SA20, and he's experienced enough to have played in the Champions League for the Perth Scorchers back in 2013, 14 and 2014, 15. So yeah, a a dependable pick, I think. You know what you're going to get with Jason Behrendorff. A lot of experience. And yeah, I think there's a philosophy at the Oval of Invincibles where they like to make sure they have pace depth. And I think other teams maybe have a clearer idea of who their first 11 is. Whereas because it's a relatively short competition, I think Oval are a side who see it as a more fluid thing when it comes to their bowling attack. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think so. I guess the only thing I'd say looking at the Oval Invincible squad is that I'm not entirely sure what their batting lineup is right now. Like you've obviously got so Will Jacks probably opens, that's fine. But there's a lot of like good all-rounders in there, or like Jordan Cox, I guess he was at three last year. Billings obviously good in the middle order, but who's that opener alongside him? There is Mieye down there at the lower price bracket, but I think he is hugely talented. But
Mm.
if you're going in with him as as the guy to open for the whole season, that's might be putting a fair bit on him. And then actually they're going to be down to, the second, one of the last picks in the draft to sort of bolster their batting strength. So there's that is an interesting thing that they've gone for. They didn't go for an overseas batter or even, a decent domestic batter, as there are a few left in there at that slot, and
Yeah.
they've kind of left it pretty late to bolster that department, I think.
Yeah, I suppose it's not that different to last year. The one difference is Dow Milan was their opener last year. So last year in the final, their top six was Jax Milan, Sam Curran, Jordan Cox at four, Sam Billings, Donovan Ferreira, Tom Curran. And actually, quite often, because of the all-rounders they had last year, they could often feel Tom Lambie as like this luxury number eight who was a specialist eight and didn't really bowl. So yeah, I mean, it's not that different to last year, and you could just be subbing Twanda Mayeye indirectly for Dow Milan, who didn't have an amazing year in the 100 last year. But yeah, I mean, actually, now I've said that out loud, I'm not really sure they have any other options, given their current makeup of their squad. Rashid Khan possibly underutilized at the bat in most T20 competitions, so maybe he has a role higher up. But it feels like, Ben, what you said is right. The Muyaya is just going to come straight into the side for Dow Milan, given how similar the rest of that squad is at the moment.
I guess so. And we're through 63K now as well, aren't we? Which means, unless I've missed him, no space for Jason Roy anywhere, which is
Yeah,
another marker of his career that had that extraordinary sort of peak leading up to the end of the 2019 World Cup that is sort of tailing off a bit now. And I guess you mentioned David Milan there, and he's in that 52K bracket, and we'll be looking to see whether he gets a go or not over the next few minutes, I say, could be next 20 minutes or so, given there's actually quite a lot of 52K slots. There's what, one, two, three, four, five, seven of them to go, seven 52K slots. So Milan maybe gets a go there, but if not, that'll be another, player who's done a lot for England and white ball cricket who will be sitting out of 100 this year.
yeah, absolutely. When it comes to reserve prices, there aren't that many English players who have set reserve prices for themselves. So actually, up until this point in the auction, it's only Tom Bailey, who we addressed earlier, Mark Wood, who was not picked up, Jamie Overton, who has been picked up, David Payne, who has been picked up, and Jason Roy, who, as Ben, you just said, has not been picked up. Interestingly, also on the £52,000 bracket list is Dean Elgar, Ben. I suppose interesting that one, he counts as an English domestic player, and number two, that he's as high as 52,000. Not necessarily someone who you associate as a 100 ball player.
Yeah, I mean, for some players, they are putting the reserve price in because it's not that they necessarily value themselves at that. It's like a sort of a may as well thing. And I don't really want to be getting out of bed for less than that. Like he'd rather, either to take August to play in the one day cup and go and struggle a bit around, have a bit of a chill time than than take a bit less money, I think, and have to go and stay in a hotel in Yorkshire for 3 weeks basically. I feel like that's more what it is for someone like Dean Elgar. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I doubt we're going to see him get picked up, but that would be fun. I mean, Dean Elgar in a crisp jersey. I mean, where do I sign? But I think likely, but an interesting one. And yeah, and even then, looking down to that 41.5K slot. So it's Rian Ahmed's still not been picked up, right? So
Yeah.
he's in that next bit of
I'm,
reserve
I'm, I'm
price
sure we'll
bracket.
see him soon. I'm sure we'll see him soon.
I'm sure you're right, but yeah.
Um, Again, I want to go too early on this just because I've already seen the live blog change the name of the person who's been picked up next. It says that Chris Green has been picked up in the last player in the 63k band for Welsh Fire. 30 seconds ago, it said it was Ashton Turner. So at the moment, let's say it's Chris Green. Again, yeah, Welsh Fire needed loads of bowling. They didn't have many seamers, and their only spinner at the start of the day was Luke Wells, who's more on the list for his batting than his bowling. So yeah, I guess a canny selection there. But yeah, it's interesting. We are coming towards a point where there's still quite a lot of slots available, but a lot of international players in particular, Ben. We talked about the domestic players, but actually loads of international players would have been gone by this point.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the thing is as well is there's actually quite this is almost where the real stories are, I think, in the 100 is this slots down here where you've got a lot of like equivalently talented domestic players in a way who either, get like a chance to show what they can do on a real sort of big stage and, obviously a decent bit of money as well. And then others who, like actually you look at someone who is signed up there in Welsh Fire in Stevie Eskenazi, who was, kind of making a mockery of the One Day Cup for years, going around just putting up these obscene numbers season after season, but not deemed as being good enough to get into the 100. He obviously has now done that now. He's actually, I think he only got a couple of games for Welsh Fire last year, but was, did well in them amid a pretty tough campaign. And it's also things where, you want to get that chance, but you also make the most of it because then that's how you get going next year. And then you see from the other point of view, like be interesting to see, for example, say a Michael Pepper who hasn't been picked up yet, who has had some extraordinary T20 blast numbers, but whenever he's had a go in the 100 has really struggled. And if teams now see that as like he's really good at one level, not good enough for another level, or if they think, no, we'll give this guy another go, will be interesting to see, I think. I've been trying to work out as well how many overseas slots have we actually got left. I feel like we might have filled most of them up, if not all. Maybe Welsh Fire have one left, unless I'm forgetting someone, and possibly Trent Rockets.
Yeah, I mean, so Ashton Turner's just been picked up for the London Spirit.
Okay.
So it's another Australian all-round who's been picked up. He's in the 52k band. But we were talking about players who we won't see in the auction now. So all the overseas players who set reserve prices of 78.5k or 63k even are now no longer on the table. So producer Dan, let us know if we've got any of these wrong. But players like Tim David haven't been picked up. Seema Ayub's not been picked up.
Fraser McGurk.
Yeah, Jake Fraser McGurk, Riley Russo, Ryan Rickleton, Sikandar Raza, Imad Wasim, Matt Short, Hassan Ali, Hamid Hussain, Shamar Joseph, Zaman Khan. So loads of really high quality overseas players have not been picked up. And I think producer Dan just got in touch to say, yeah, all overseas slots have now been taken. All over, so we were talking about young Pretorius, the South African 18-year-old who lit up the SA20. He will not be in the 100 at this point in time in 2025. Welsh Fire have picked up Northants batter Saif Zaib. If memory serves me correctly, he had an excellent blast in 2024. 26 years old, bowls a bit of left arm spin as well. Let's have a look. In 2024, he got a couple of 50s, struck at 168. So he's again, I guess, a similar sort of player to Max Holden. Been around for a while, but in the last couple of years, his scoring rate's really gone up a level. Struck at 150 a couple of years ago as well. So yeah, he's in the 52k bracket as well. It looks like the names are coming through slightly quickly. Ben, what have you been most surprised about in the overseas list of players who haven't been picked up yet? Now we're pretty sure we've seen all the overseas players come out. Is there anyone who you thought, based on recent form, would be in that hasn't been picked?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just because he's in every competition going, I'm astonished by Tim David, really. And after he had a really good end to the BBL, I think, as well. And then the BBL, I'm pretty sure it was the BBL. And he just, he seems to get in every competition going and generally justifies the price he goes for, doing something that not many other players can do. But I guess that's the thing, is that when you only have 24 slots, if you have such a specific role and no one wants that role, then that's your lot basically. But Jake Fraser McGurk is interesting as well. I mean, I guess you might say that, again, if your overseas player has to start, he is quite hit and miss. Maybe he hits a poor run of form, and then all of a sudden you're kind of down a player. But that is still interesting. And I'm just gutted that Simon Reeves not going to be. I know I talked about him earlier, but that's a shame. And also someone you did mention, Asmatullah Omartsai. I mean, I guess he's a kind of do it all rounder that is really valuable for a team like Afghanistan, because like the more value you can add there, you can be like that can then cover for a team that has actually a few holes elsewhere in the lineup. And maybe you might say his batting and bowling isn't neither quite at the class for being in a top class T20 side, maybe, but I thought he looked really good at that Champions Trophy, and he was someone who would have been interesting in this tournament as well. So there's a few names, but there's loads. But I guess that's the thing that's so cruel about a 24 slot over system. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the things that changes for next year with a bit more money in it, and you want a bit more branding behind it with these new team owners, and they just want a bit more option in their squads as well, I guess.
100%. A couple of comments from some of the viewers. Patrick says, incredibly surprised no one fancies a bit of the Gherkin. JFM's been a real showcase cricketer of late. I guess he's just had a very badly timed run of form if he wanted to be picked up in this competition. Obviously lit up the IPL a year ago, but that is 10, 11 months ago. But yeah, he's someone whose style of batting you think is actually suited to a shorter format. He comes out of the block so quickly. I'm not hugely surprised he's not been picked because of his recent form, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, something you see in men's T20 drafts a lot is loads of Aussies get picked. A lot of these guys aren't actually that close to the Australian setup. I mean, we saw it there with some of the last names coming in, guys like Chris Green, Ashton Turner, Riley Meredith, Jason Berendorf, guys who aren't really involved in the Australia setup at the moment, but they still very consistently get these big money gigs in overseas leagues. We're getting into a more, it has to be domestic from now on because all the spots have been filled. Trent Rockets have picked up Adam Hose, who's previously been at the Superchargers, and Michael Pepper, who won an England call-up over the winter, has been picked up by the Northern Superchargers for 52k. He predominantly opens the batting. He's another player who I put in that Dan Lawrence, Zach Crawley bracket of being a young player who's played a bit in the 100, immensely talented, but doesn't have a great record in the 100, but has an amazing record in the Blast. Last year, he was arguably the standout domestic batter in the T20 Blast for Essex. So no surprises at all to see him picked. Ben, slight change of topic. No Pakistani players picked up in the 100 draft. It was one of the concerns that obviously there are no Pakistani players in the IPL, and now we have some teams owned or partially owned by IPL sides. What do you make of the lack of Pakistani? I guess no Pakistani players been picked for any of the teams so far.
Yeah, I wonder if so. I don't think there's dates for it completely, but in the Future Tours program, so they've got a tour of West Indies, but that's going to be done, I think, by the start of August. Or no, actually, that's going to overlap, I think, with maybe the first little bit of the 100, because it's right after that the CPL starts. And then they also have in the Future Tours program a tour against Afghanistan are touring as well, which maybe their best players might be able to leave out a bit, but actually the PCB are pretty strict with pulling players out of it, out of competitions, and also they have this 2 NOCs rule as well. So I wonder if there's just that little bit of availability concern with the dates that kind of up in the air that mean that they've steered clear as well. But obviously that is a genuine concern. We've seen, and it's so hard to draw to understand what is going on behind the scenes in these franchises, and if that ever is a thing. But you did see at times, in the SA20 you had not as many sort of Pakistan players being picked up as you did in other competitions, and that is definitely something we're gonna have to look at and watch closely, basically, and go and just hold people's feet to the fire and ask, I mean, I'm furious that Simon Hugh's not going to be there just from a cricketing point of view. But that could be why. But I guess we'll see more next year as well, I suppose.
I think it's way too early for us to say firmly one way or the other if IPL influence has anything to do with no Pakistan players being picked up. For starters, only 4 of the teams have IPL partial ownership or more than partial ownership. And also, I guess Pakistani cricket is at a low ebb at the moment. There aren't that many players who are tearing it up in T20 leagues. The national side's obviously really struggling at the moment across formats. So definitely a story to keep an eye on in the next year or so, but I don't think at the moment we can say categorically that has anything to do with their absences at the moment. I guess from an optics point of view, in previous years, Pakistani involvement in the 100 has been relatively high, but that often has to do with player availability, etc. Player availability for the 100 this year is much better, generally speaking, than it has been in previous years. Do we have any more?
We do. Reece Topley signed for Southern Brave, so that's
a formidable bowling attack again. Not too dissimilar to London Spirit in terms of it's a formidable bowling attack full of English talent. So Reece Topley joining Jofra Archer, Tamar Mills, Craig Overton, and Chris Jordan. I must be honest, Ben, I'm very surprised Reece Topley's not been picked up until now. Very
yeah. Yeah, well, when we were talking about, David Payne, that 120k bracket for Welsh Fire, partly because of that left arm angle, and then you've got, Reece Topley, who's, higher, at least in the England pecking order, going for less than half that. That is interesting. I mean, and it's a steal, and he's also someone who will come into the tournament with quite a point to prove, I think, given that he's not yet been selected in a McCullum England squad. Having been, a frequent part of England squads before that, but also with injury keeping him out at times as well. It's interesting that he hasn't gone until now. But as you say, that bowling attack looks really good. But they need some spinners as well, don't they, Southern Brave?
Yeah. At the moment, they only
They've
have
got Bracewell and Briggs, yeah.
Bracewell and Briggs. So only conventional finger spin, no mystery spin options there at the moment. We're into the last couple of picks in the 52,000 category. A reminder that we've recently seen Adam Hose, Michael Pepper, Reece Topley, and now Darren Milan go in that category. Darren Milan is going to the Northern Superchargers, having been part of the Oval Invincible side that won the competition in 2024. I guess at this point in the auction, Ben, or draft rather, you're either making a choice about, are you going for maybe a younger talent who's yet to really show that they can consistently do it at this level, or you're going for a safer pair of hands. And with Darren Milan, you know what you're getting.
Yeah, I guess so. And also given they've taken a couple of sort of punts in Zach Crawley and Dan Lawrence as well. So you've got, they've got an all international top 6 there, right? With 5 English players if they want to pick it, with Lawrence, Crawley, Brook, Milan, and Miller. So that's pretty handy. You might say that there's, you've got 2 guys there who, in Lawrence and Crawley, basically, I think someone they're going to have to say to them, your role is to go really, really hard in that batting lineup. And it'll be interesting to see who they pick to do that, because you can kind of see the advantage for any of them, but they've all got, well, Milan apart, but that's not been his game in T20 cricket. The other 3 all have real points to prove as well. So one of them's going to almost have to maybe take one for the team, sacrifice a bit in the batting points, and get them off to a flyer a little bit, I guess. Well, but so we're into the Trent Rockets are about to make the last 52k pick, right? And this is the last possible time for Rian Ahmed. So
no, I don't think that's quite
right.
No,
sorry, he's in 41.5. You're right.
He did 41.5, and the Superchargers, that was the last 52k pick. It was also the last Superchargers pick. So they are now done, joining Manchester Originals in being done with their business today. So next up, we are going into the 41.5k category. So to sum up, London Spirit have 1 spot available at this price. Welsh Fire 1. Birmingham Phoenix 2, Southern Brave 1, Oval Invincibles 1. So we're coming towards the end of the draft. So there are 2 spots available in each squad at 41.5k and one spot available in each squad. It's 31k at this point in the 100 cycle. Two more 31k players are added after the Blast group stage. Those are the two wildcard picks that are predominantly based on T20 Blast performance. Still no Jimmy Anderson, Ben, and no Rocky Flintoff. He was in a lot of the headlines before the draft, as those are the two most eye-catching names, I guess, for casual cricket fans. I think it's pretty unlikely that Rocky Flintoff gets picked up in the draft.
Yes, I think so. But we did actually have one because it snakes around. So we had one more 52k pick for Trent Rockets, who had two slots left there, and they've gone for Ian Ahmed. So
yes,
he's in the 100, and an interesting place for him to go. I mean, as a leg spinner bowling a lot at Trent Bridge, that can be a hard task. But it's a real place. A sink or swim type thing for him. And he'll like it as a batter for sure. And that's Trent Rockets done as well. So I'm just basically really glad that he's got a home, even if it's a little bit lower down than he might have expected. And will be really interesting to see how it goes this season, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, just a trend more generally is how unfancied English wrist spinners are, right? Mason Crane, for example, he played last year, but only as a wild card pick. Jake Lintott has done well in the 100, did really well for the Southern Brave for a couple of years, but he's no longer a regular in the competition. Matt Parkinson, someone with an outstanding domestic T20 record, he doesn't get picked up. Why do you think it is? Why do you think it is that English wrist spinners in particular aren't really fancied in 100?
England and wrist spin, I mean, how long have you got? I guess, I suppose one of the things is that in an opposite way to how you might get it with in India with fast bowling in the IPL, and then also the other thing when they don't pick wrist spinners is that there are so many good wrist spinners around the world that you can sort of find a few players there. So you've got Noor Ahmed's obviously got a gig, Rashid Khan's got a gig, but then also maybe it's just a conditions thing where actually unless you're the very, very best, they might think that it's just a tough thing to bowl, basically. Like Adam Zampa in the overseas slot, not getting a go, having won the thing for Open Invincibles last year. Maybe it's more of a trend, not so much about English wrist spin, but actually about how they see wrist spin in general in the 100. I haven't got the numbers in front of me to say has it gone well or not. Southall also has been a brilliant player for Open Invincibles as well. So I guess there are a few here and there, but I guess there's something in do they see these particular wrist spinners as being good enough, and maybe they think that you need to be either a particular type or just a really, really good leg spinner to make a difference. And then if you're that bit lower, then actually on some truer pitches you can just kind of hit through the line and or not hit through the line, but slog sweep and you can get it clear most grounds, I guess.
Yeah, Adam Zampa, a victim of Rashid Khan joining the Invincibles. Zampa, a key figure in Oval's win in 2024. Talking of English wrist spinners, Jaffa Johan has been picked up. Who's been picked up by? By the
London Spirit, yeah.
London Spirit, which is Johan, an amazing story, Ben. Wasn't in the professional game, then suddenly very quickly elevated not just into the Blast, but got a big bash deal last winter and an England call up as well.
Yeah, and I think they really like him at England. So I was at the Rob Key press conference last week, and they he name checked him there as well as being sort of one of these guys. I think basically sometimes England's plan with spinners, as you saw with Bashir and with Hartley, is if they identify someone who is talented, they want to kind of get him into the setup and have a look at them, and also kind of almost move them out of county cricket a little bit to train them in that. So that's and he's really, really exciting, and it's also his England selection was a real big thing for the Blast because he hadn't played in the 100 last year, but he was exceptional for Yorkshire in that as kind of a sort of a more modern type of wrist spinner. So
what do you mean by a more modern type of wrist spinner? So
it's a lot of he's not Matt Parkinson, I guess, would be from the old world where he's slower, he's tossing it up, he's trying to beat batters in the get it above the eye line, beat him in the flight. Where you're kind of saying, come and have a go. I think if you try and hit me, you'll get caught in the deep. The more modern wrist spinners are making it, that they're faster, they're flatter, they're saying, I'm just not going to let you get under me. And I'm going to put a bit on the ball that means that it's going to go a little bit in one way or the other. And that's how I'm going to outfox you, basically.
Ben, we were very excited by one young English player being picked, maybe 7 or 8 hours ago in Ben McKinney. Another one's been picked. Harry Moore from Derbyshire, just 17 years old, has been picked up by Birmingham Phoenix. People won't have heard of Harry Moore, but he's incredibly highly rated. Derbyshire coach Mickey Arthur described him as the best 17-year-old he's ever seen. And Mickey Arthur is someone who's coached multiple high-level international teams. He's massive, he's pretty quick and can bat. Possibly won't play that much in 2025, but this is another sign of just how highly rated Moore is.
Yeah, absolutely. And given you mentioned Mickey Arthur, maybe he'll be kicking himself that he didn't go from at Northern Superchargers, where he's director of cricket. Is that his role up there?
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
That's but yeah, I mean it's really, really exciting. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get a game this season, but it's interesting because you can say, well, why don't you leave him for a World Cup pick if you're not sure how good he is? But equally, if someone else picks him up and then all of a sudden he's a hot property, then you'd be kicking yourself. So yeah, a very fun thing to do, especially when you get to this stage in the auction where you can sort of fill out a squad and maybe take a punt or two. And also, if you think someone's going to be this good, then you keep them this year, you keep them next year, and then you've kind of got them in your setup for the years going forward.
Yeah, 100%. He's someone who we talked about Sonny Baker earlier. Sonny Baker is someone who conceivably, if he has an amazing summer, could end up on an Ashes plane at the end of the year. Moore is quite a long way away from that, but I think he is someone who could be talked about loads at the end of the year. So he's only 17. He turns 18 in a month and a half time. Made his Derbyshire debut in 2023. So he was 16 and a half at the time. Last year played most of their games in the One Day Cup and ended the season firmly in Derbyshire's Red Bull side. He played the last 3 games of the season and did well. He took 6 wickets, averaging just under 24 with the ball. As I said, immense talent. Derbyshire were really excited about him. Mickey Arthur's really excited about him. So really good to see him picked up in the 100 at such an early stage in his career. Southern Brave have their last pick of the day. They've picked up Jordan Thompson, the Yorkshire all-rounder, who's been a regular in the competition for a few years. Very dependable player and gives you options. He elongates your batting lineup and also is a very canny operator with the ball. Another one who bowls in very difficult phases of the game. So when you see his raw numbers, you've got to take them with a pinch of salt sometimes, because you've got to take into account that he's bowling at some very difficult periods in an innings. I think, Ben, we only have 6 picks left. So we're coming towards the end of the auction. Dan, again, correct us if we've got that wrong. So we've just had Jordan Thompson picked up by Southern Brave, who are now done. So what have we got left? I think we've got a few 31k picks, one at London Spirit, one at Welsh Fire, one at Oval Invincibles, and 3 more in the 41.5k bracket. I think Birmingham Phoenix have another one, and a couple of others to come through as well. Get your questions in, because we've only got a few minutes left, we reckon. I think we've only got 6 picks left to go. Ben, have you got a squad on paper that looks the strongest to you?
Well, first I've got to try and keep in my mind who is in every squad. It's hard when you're looking at trying to fill in the blanks. I mean, I guess with the caveat, it's really hard to get past Oval Invincibles, to be honest, because they were obviously they managed to piece together this squad last year that didn't have the guys who were smack bang in the middle of the England team, but were clearly still of a class and were ready to show that they kind of were ready for another go, basically. So Sam Curran, Todd Curran as well. Jordan Coxwell was a bit different, on the rise, and he got an interesting summer ahead of him, having been the next man in for England and then been very quickly sort of supplanted by Bethel. But when you just take a squad that was good enough to win the competition and then you add in Rashid Khan to it, it's pretty healthy. There is the caveat there of how do they get that battle lineup going? Who opens with Will Jacks? I guess is it Miye? Do they find another player there? But that's pretty handy. Southern Brave look okay, but I mentioned that spin department just looks fairly a bit light to me. I mean, Briggs, a very, very good spinner at this level. Bracewell that's a big punt at 200k to expect him to bet. I think basically they must be saying there that, obviously he doesn't play every game as an overseas player as well, but they must expect him to be like a lead of that spin attack almost, and that is a big ask for him. But yeah, it's and Manchester Originals, I mean, that batting lineup is great. The bowling lineup, I think, a little bit flimsy. I think London Spirit, they've got that. There's a lot of sort of experienced heads in there. You've got Williamson, Warner, Dawson as well, I guess fits into that category. But I wonder if there's a little bit of explosiveness up top that they might be wanting. So it's I not sure. Over Invincibles, I like the look of. I'm not sure there's a hugely standout squad, which I suppose is the way it should be. Who do you see as?
Yeah, I mean, at a really basic level, I agree with you. If Oval Invincibles won the thing last year, they have a very side composition this year, but they've swapped Rashid Khan for Adam Zampa. You think that they'd be pretty well placed to go again. Rashid Khan, obviously the best T20 spinner in the world, but also can really whack it with the bat, so it gives them even more batting depth than they had last year. Birmingham Phoenix are interesting because they have such a gun set of English batters. And they have those 3 New Zealand quicks who are overseas, but there are bits and pieces in the spin bowling department. I think at the moment their only spinners are Liam Livingstone, Jacob Bethel, and Dan Mosley, which is England's spin attack on that tour of the Caribbean pretty much just before the winter. And I think all 3 of those are talented spinners in one way or the other. I think Liam Livingstone is extremely underrated as a bowler. I think particularly his leg spin is really good, and I actually think sometimes he'd be better off bowling his leg spin all the time. Jacob Bethel, I think, is still quite a match-uppy bowler, and Dan Mosley is someone who, well, he had that extraordinary game in the 100 last year where he took 3 for 1 in the last 10 balls of the game to defend not very many runs at all. But is he someone who's going to bowl consistently throughout an innings over the course of an entire season? I'm not sure. But again, maybe it's just a reflection. We were talking about how few English wrist spinners there are in the competition. Maybe it's just a reflection of how teams view white ball cricket in England. Do you actually need that much spin? Obviously, the Parkinson twins are 2 guys who've played in the 100 before. They've not been picked up so far. I don't think Mason Crane's been picked up. So yeah, spin's not really played a role. And I think Birmingham Phoenix are quite similarly placed to Southern Brave in terms of, I love the players they've got, but does it fit together as a full 11? I don't know. And obviously conditions are different, grounds are different, but the Oval Invincibles, they won the competition last year. They would always bowl 40 balls of spin through Nathan Souter and Adam Zampa. Speaking of Mason Crane, he's just been picked up at Welsh, which is where he was last year, I believe. A couple other signings we've just missed. Josh Hull, who made his test debut famously for England at the Oval summer against Sri Lanka. He's been picked up from Welsh Fire. He's not a total newbie in the 100. He played for the Originals a bit last year. Birmingham Phoenix are done for the day. Their last pick in the 41.5k bracket is Tom Helm. Wayne Madsen, the 41-year-old Derbyshire, now captain again. Wayne Madsen is heading to Lords. He is one of the 31k picks. Crane is also a 31k pick. And the very last pick of the draft is Miles Hammond, who goes to the reigning champions Oval Invincibles. Ben, good effort. We've just 2.5 hours, I think. So well done. Thank you very much for all the people in the comments who've been with us from the very start in particular. Thank you for those comments. And a reminder that if you're new to Wisden, we've got 3 weekly podcasts, one predominantly on men's cricket, one predominantly on women's cricket, and one over on the Patreon channel, which you can get involved in at just £5 a month plus VAT. Me and Ben and producer Dan are done for the day, but we'll be back with our women's podcast on Friday.